that kind of point of view for a while. But now I've kind of gone back to a Orthodox Christianity where it's like, no, actually, it's not a dialectic. God is controlling stuff, and it's not that God is part of the dialectic of history or like this unborn development, but that the development is God's will, you know? And I feel like that's kind of a distinction in Christianity, maybe. And they both like have their, not that you even have to pick one, but they kind of both have their attractions, I feel. And this, and I don't want to misunderstand what Mark said. It sounds like he said that some of the monks have this idea that it's all mine, right? Isn't that what he
He
said?
was saying specifically the Tibetan monks. So just one, I don't know, one stream of Buddhism argues
Right,
it's all mind.
right. Yeah, I understand that Buddhism is contested, or it's not one thing, but like that right there, because that's like the same argument that like the I don't know, like the philosophers will talk about, you know, like what epistemology, is that it? Like how do we know anything, and
Yeah.
um and like can you even prove anything? Like Jan God said, if you like crap your pants, or whatever, but um how do you know anything for sure? And I feel like that's almost the distinction between Eastern mysticism maybe and Christianity, because like Christianity, you have faith that there's things outside of you that are going on. Almost like you have faith that there is a world and flesh, and I don't know, maybe that's a false distinction, but
I think though the problem with all God is in control. The idea of a controlling God, then we end up in that difficult position that
like almost the Calvinism.
Yeah, you got the Calvinism, Arminian thing, but you also have the problem of evil. If God's in control, then the devil had to do it.
Right. I didn't mean to make it sound like I think that God even is in control. Like God causes evil and God causes suffering and all this stuff.
Right.
I think that like there is a truth to like a dialectical view of history, but in the end, like God's will prevails, and it's above the dialectic.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of what I think.
It's such a mystery. I mean, that's the thing. As I prefer just to, I'm coming more to the view of I just take Scripture as is and accept all the tensions and seeming contradictions at kind of face value, and don't try to overinterpret them, and just trust in the goodness of God and the example of Jesus, and roll with it. And what I can't understand, I try to live with, and the stuff I don't understand, I don't overthink it. I don't shelve it either. I just kind of let it sit there.
No, I feel you, man. It used to be when I don't understand something, I'm like, I got to find an answer,
Exactly.
And I have to. So okay, let's find the debate. Who believes this and who believes that? This interpretation, or and yeah, there are. I mean, sometimes you do find some answers, but I think like especially with Scripture, it's like a lot of these things are just supposed to be mysterious, and just like for me, like the Bible, so like a lot of people believe that the Bible is like a blueprint and like instructions for everything. And there's
before leaving Earth.
Instructions. Yeah. But I think more than that, for me, it's just something that happens in my heart. I read it and it just has these effects, and like I don't even know exactly what they are sometimes, but Mark, I heard you say something a while back, and it really stuck with me. You said most of the like the more definite experiences you've had with the Holy Spirit are like connected with Scripture in some way, and I feel that way as well. Like all the times where I really sensed that God was like present within me doing something was like connected to reading Scripture or something like that.
Yeah.
And but so yeah, it's like for me lately, it's just especially like the Psalms, the Gospels, the writing. It's just I don't need to know. It's a mystery a lot of the time, and a lot of the time it's like it hits pretty hard and it's kind of terrifying. It's just like okay, that's fine. Sometimes it's super comforting. Just you never know.
Agreed. I don't know if I closed the loop on the whole Buddhist thing, and I don't even remember what the question was we were trying to solve. It was something about awareness and
I
mind.
asked
Oh, inside and out.
internal to external, and you
Yeah.
talked about Tibetan, and then Mark
Right.
jumped in, and then I messaged Al, and then Mark talked, and Al appeared in chat, but not yet on stream. And then Al said a bunch of really wild words that I don't know how to pronounce. And now we're back.
He's really good with the terminology. Yes, he's very good with this Sanskrit and Pali, and and the multisyllabics. Yes. We got a random. Maybe I'll restart Rando Radio just to interview Al, because somebody needs to Rando Al.
I messaged him.
He needs a proper 2-hour interview.
Agreed.
We need his origin story.
Teo says restart. Well, I guess I'm putting words in Teo's mouth. That's unfair. I apologize, Teo.
What did he say? What did Tyler? I can't see it from my little screen. What did he say?
I just commented on Ramp Radio.
Oh, gotcha.
Mark, Mark S. Is there anything from the 12 steps that talks about the relationship between the internal and the external?
Totally, man. It's not. I wouldn't say it's like a foundational metaphysics, but it's like so when you're going through the big book, which all of AA is based on, like you kind of learn about the inability to control drinking, the inability to stay sober. Like if you have it and you relate, you keep going and you kind of learn a couple other things. And there's like this process of sort of internalizing these things that are like beyond habit. And like alcoholism is more than a habit. And like powerless isn't just like a cliche. It's something that's real. And then kind of do some other things. And then when you get almost to step 4, where you take an inventory, it just says selfishness and self-centeredness. That is the root of our troubles, and the root of our problem rests in our mind. And I think for alcoholics, especially who are like very narcissistic in a way, we'll just be blaming other people for so much stuff all the time, and trying to find these reasons for our failure that are beyond ourselves. And so then in step 4, there's like a 3-part inventory, focuses on different things of like the defects of our mind, basically. If that answers your question. So like the first inventory is like analyzes our resentments, how we have basically fanned the flame ourselves, and if not caused them, then kept them going. And then another one is like fears, how we have all these irrational fears. Like there's like this it's almost like a deconstruction of fear. And then there's like sex life, which is really just relationships. So and I've done a lot of these inventories,
Yeah.
and they're extremely powerful. And I've kind of come to so like resentment. That's just something on the surface. Like if you're living pissed off and with resentment all the time, you just got to get that out of the way. And so that's why that's the first one. And then the second one is fear. The third one is sex. And I always thought that was weird. Like, how did they come up with these concepts of like fear and sex? And then after doing a bunch, I realized, oh, because it's like two sides of the same coin. Fear is like everything I don't want to happen. And then my sex life or relationship, like power dynamics, is everything like I desire to happen. And they're like two sides of the same coin, like fighting with each other. And they're both, it's just a mess, you know? You kind of like deconstruct both your fears and your sexual desires and conduct. It's not desires, it's conduct, like how you go about. And it's not even sexual either. It's not pornographic at all. It's all just about trying to deal with people, you know? So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
I mean, yeah, it gives me a million more questions, but it's because I've been like Chad and I, one of us will call the other, and often we end up like no matter what we talk about, we often end up just talking about the steps, and it's such an interesting, like it's one of those things where like I have known about the steps for for a very long time, but I've never like been in a discussion with people about it until just the last couple of months. So it's so interesting because so many people I know have like gone through the steps, and I mean, like coming from Wisconsin, I mean, like,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of alcohol, and there's a lot of folks that have also, don't want to let alcohol rule their lives. So it's,
Yeah.
the steps are so interesting as I don't know what you, I don't, well, yeah, they fascinate me. The whole thing fascinates me, and it's really beautiful, and it, knowing people whose lives have changed through, I don't know if you call it following the steps, practicing the steps, doing the steps. It's awesome.
Well, yeah, and I mean, most of the people, well, lots of people in AA who have taken the steps, if you ask them about it, it's just like, yeah, I made this list, I wrote it down, I showed it to somebody, and I moved on. Like, what's the big deal? What is there to talk about it?
Yeah.
And but with me, and I think Chad, we're similar in the way that it's like, what the hell is going on here? Why is it that we made this list and did these things, and then all of a sudden we just don't want to drink? Like what happened? And so, like, I yeah, I think it's a fascinating process. Um, and like Al said, IFS sound like there is a little bit of that. You're like hearing different voices come out when you're working the steps. You're hearing different parts of yourself, but it's not real. It's just to let it speak for a while. So because like you're full of demons, and I'm not saying I have demons, but alcoholism probably is. All chatter and like vying for power, and then more and more you just keep covering them up with booze and bad decisions, and then empowering them more. And so, like, taking step 4 is like you actually get to write out what it's saying, and let it have its say, and in a way that you can't just like cover it up. It's there on paper, and you have to share it. And then there's a and then like the very last part of that is looking at your own mistakes in it, you know, and it kind of like takes the wind out of the sails in a lot of ways of those defects. But I don't know, like I was talking to Ron Copperman
Yeah.
a couple weeks ago, and I was sharing with him some things that have been messing with me, some like obsessive stuff, and he's like, and of course, in a charismatic fashion, it's like, oh, you got spiritual warfare going on. I'm like, all right, probably. And he goes, you know what you got to do? You just got to tell yourself that's not me. And I straight up told him, because I've talked to Ron a lot, and
Yeah.
I told him, Ron, I don't really think that's true, though. I don't really think that's true. I don't think it's going to work, but I'll think about it. And so I started struggling, and I used that, like, that's not me. And then all of a sudden, like, at the same time, I was memorizing this part of Colossians chapter 2, where it's like, we have put off the old self, its practices, and put on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge of its creator. And it's like, oh, actually, no, that is the old self. And that's not me, which is the new self. And it's like, and that actually kind of worked what he told me, And it was weird how that sort of came together, in that way. 'Cause, like, just telling myself, no, that's not me, you know. Um, so yeah, Ron, I don't even really believe in miracles, but I believe Ron is a healer.
I mean, Ron has a lot of stories of healing. I've been around non-charismatic communities where there were, one or two people with just, I don't know, charismatic bent, or I mean, not even charismatic bent really, because I grew up non-denominational, so there's all kinds of different humans that end up in a non-denominational church or college space or summer camp, and I've seen multiple healings. I've been, I don't know, participated in those events. And then when I was 25 years old, I turned my back from God and I left the faith. And I kind of just scienced it all away. It was just very simple to be like, oh, there's a scientific explanation for a kind of tumor that exists on one's leg and then recedes. I go, okay, well, that explains what happened that night at midnight on the dock at summer camp when 10 of us gathered around an office worker and prayed, and then the tumor went away. It was always going to happen, and there was we scienced it. Okay, sure, that's cool, makes sense. And you just you science it all.
Right.
And then a couple months ago, I don't know, the trap door of science. I exited the science thing. I couldn't science my way into things anymore.
Right. I mean, if you have health problems and you're struggling to find treatment and feel better, you realize how weak science is. I'm not anti-science, but I'm just saying, I have a couple health conditions, and I'm a pretty nerdy guy. I can go down rabbit holes. Just trying to figure out how to cure these things is science is really annoying. It's really insufficient for a lot of things, and I feel like I don't know. My current view on these types of things is about healings and such is that there's so much going on behind the scenes spiritually, and I think sometimes that even evil spirits can do healings. There's these portals that were porous sometimes, and they can appear to be good, and it's because I've heard NPR stories and stuff about people just being cured from leprosy out of nowhere and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that's demonic, but it's just I think that that Christ just had there's all these different things going on in the spiritual realm, and Christ just came in and he was the champion of all that. He just said, look, a lot of people can do lots of stuff. I can do everything better than everyone. And so, yeah, I feel like there's, and I don't know if anything completely unexplainable can happen today. Because even when I
What do you mean by
listen
that?
to Ron, well, what I mean is, well, if you take the story of Jesus walking on water in a storm, literally, like if you think that really happened, as most Christians usually have, I think, then I don't I don't know if that can happen today. You know, well, with God, all things are possible, but I don't know if that does happen today. Or like Lazarus, they said his body already started to stink, and Jesus raised him from the dead.
Yeah.
What can that happen today? I've never known anybody who's seen something like that happen, and so I have serious doubts about any of that stuff. But when it comes to prayer, coincidence, and the providence of God, it's so strong. It's almost like I don't know, but it's still mysterious. It's still, even though I totally believe in all that blue stuff, like angels, demons, providence, everything. I still think that there's a shroud of mystery over it right now, to where we can't we talk a lot about propositional tyranny, and
What does that mean?
so
I really don't know what that means exactly. Propositional tyranny.
well, for instance, well, I don't either, but I just hear it and I think I know what it means. And what I think it means is because what I was raised in, where it's okay, we have this 5-point plan that's based on the Bible, that you do it and you go to heaven. You hear, you believe, you repent, you confess, you be baptized. And that's
Yeah.
the way to salvation. And we have all these verses and scriptures and diagrams and charts to prove our point. And we have Greek scholars that know the blah, blah, blah. And even though I pretty much believe that, there was also this attitude of well, you just need to be honest with yourself and just look at the facts and you'll see my point of view, and that's just not so. Like everybody, nobody has a purely rational conversion. It's it doesn't matter what type of chart you show somebody. If Christ doesn't give them a tap on their shoulder in some personal way, they're not going to probably do anything. Um, Even though the propositions, if you think propositional tyranny is bad, wait till you've seen relational tyranny. That's pretty bad too. But how did that tie into what I was talking about before? Oh yeah, just in a conversion experience, things happen behind the scenes. Things come together that completely change our lives, and it's well, it was just an internal thing. It made you be aware of God and want to seek out like-minded people and turn your life around, and you completely change. And it's yeah, but a materialist will say, well, that was just some type of psychological switch that doesn't really matter, your perception of that. And it's no, actually that matters more. That actually is more important than, and not just because of some eternal soul salvation, but just as human beings. But it's that's more important. So science really can't get us. I don't know, but it did since AI. Jesus.
You're getting choppy there at the end. I lost the last 3 sentences. I think science is really
That's
beautiful.
probably God's will.
It could be. Yeah, I mean, like you're saying, like, I don't think either one of us is anti-science. I just think that when science becomes the thing that answers everything, I go, like I might need some answers that can't be found in science.
Yeah. Yep. And I mean, even though I know it is flat, it doesn't mean I'm against science. I'm kidding. Everything's they're not against science.
Mark Parker, are you here to tell us that we need more science, less science? Do we have the right amount of science? That was a McMo intro. I was trying to do a McMo intro.
Exactly. Very good. No, you're doing a good job. I love it. I'm loving this, Mark, too, what you were saying. I never, as I put in all caps, do not underestimate Ron Copperman. I mean it. He's really gifted. But it's hard to get there. I struggle with because I'm very much ingrained with embedded into the materialist scientific worldview. So that's definitely a struggle, but if you can, and some of the stuff about spiritual warfare, I mean, he's, like you said, he helps you, Mark, which is amazing. But in an unhealthy person or an unhealthy mind, that stuff could spin off in a completely different direction. Because I've met people who can't believe in God, but boy, do they believe in the devil.
Yeah.
And it never works out well. I mean, it's weird how dark. I mean, it's frightening how dark human beings can get.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I don't know what Ron does and how he does it works. It works for him, certainly. And I've yet to figure out how to bridge it, how to, get myself I can't operate in that realm very effectively. I either have it or I don't. There's no in between, and it's just by a mercy of God that I get those moments when faith comes over me and I have it. But for the most part, I spend more time not in faith than I do in faith. When I'm not in faith, then I just trust. Okay, we're going to keep going with this out of trust. But it's a different.
Okay,
Ron seems to be. Go ahead.
So are you?
Well, what's
you
the
talking about
what's the
faith as
distinction
kind
between
of a
trust and faith?
Sorry, you guys talked over each other. Try again. Ethan first. Help me out.
I was going to say, what's the distinction between trust and faith?
When the way I'm using it in this situation, it's probably not necessarily accurate, but the way I'm using it in this situation is faith is just the gift of the Holy Spirit in the moment. I'm just gifted this moment of faith. Jesus says we're crossing the sea. It doesn't matter if there are storms. We're crossing from here to there. Because that's the whole story. It's a great story the way John Wimber tells it about when they cross the Sea of Galilee in the storm, and Jesus is asleep in the back, and the guys wake him up and say, "We're drowning!" Right? They're losing their minds, and Jesus' response to them is, "Where's your faith?" It has no practical advice for them whatsoever. It's just, "Where's your faith?" We don't have any. We didn't bring it. We're worried about drowning. And the idea, and his point was, is that I said we're going from to the other side. So it doesn't matter how we get there, we're going to the other side. And it was a spiritual warfare setup, right? That's where they meet the guy with Legion, the severely demonized fellow. That's faith. That's just that extraordinary gift of faith that I know we're going to go from here to there. I know it's going to happen. I know that this person, when I know I'm supposed to pray for this person right here, right now. Trust is, he said, pray for those who curse you, or pray for the sick, and he says to do this or that. I participate in my Christian practice in trust. I'm just going to trust. I don't have any feels. I don't feel one way or the other about it. I may feel very badly about it, but I still keep going forward. That's kind of what I mean. I don't know if that clarified it for you at all or not.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to drive Mark away. I wanted to hear more from Mark.
I think I heard him driving, so I'm assuming that he was focusing on driving. I hope that we didn't drive him away.
Yeah, I just popped into this. I was to kind of agree with him more or less.
Well, yeah, and feel free to pop out. No, there's no pressure. No pressure to remain.
Where is it for you? Where are you at right now? Are you in the faith camp, trust camp? What's happening with you now that you're what? How many months has it been since Grok reconstructed you?
The Lord reconstructed me.
No, Jesus. The Lord spoke through Grok like he spoke through the mule.
Yeah, Grok is an ass, that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, where am I on? There is pressure to restart the on-ramp radio.
Okay. Hey, it's Al.
Okay, let's respect our elders. Let's make sure we get them up top.
Is that what that means?
I mean, it's a hierarchy, right? The top is the...
Oh, Lord. The corner is so into hierarchies. It's this whole Pajot, Peterman.
It's
or
not
Peterson.
real world. When I worked in the bank, this is why I laugh at this idea. When I started in the bank, I was a bit of an idiot savant, but I was the youngest. So they always treated me like the youngest, same as my brothers, but I always did their homework. And then when I was done in the bank, I was one of the oldest, yet they still came to me. So I think it's a construct. And I think, what's her name? Elaine Langer. She's known for bringing mindfulness to North America, but I love that she did a study, and she took two groups of elderly, and one group just lived their life as normal, and she had another group live as if they were, decades younger. The news, they talked about current events, they listened to the radio and the music of the time, and they saw a marked improvement in even their blood tests. Right, so just so I can mention that, right? I think age is a construct as much as the self is, which is what you guys were talking about that I found interesting. And trust versus faith, that's an interesting subject for me, especially when it comes to linguistics and culturally. So what are you guys interested in talking about, if anything at all?
Okay, well, I want to pause real quick because
sure.
there's a pattern, and it always happens, is that Mark S. has something to say, and then we speed past him.
Oh.
So I got to get Mark S. in.
We came in at the same time. My apologies.
I know. No apologies. Mark S. Jump in.
Oh, thanks. I mean, I didn't have nothing to say, but I appreciate it. But since you asked, I'll complain that my phone really sucks and I hate it.
That's why I came in as well. It was hard to grok everything on the Android.
Yeah, I'm at that point to where I'm getting all these updates and like, I know they just want me to get a new phone, so it's just not working. So, but yeah, I came back in because I didn't mean to leave abruptly. I was enjoying the conversation. I don't.
That's why I
but
joined
yeah,
in to say amen to you, Mark. So that's why I kind of came
oh,
in, was
cool.
to agree with you. So
Mhm.
Yeah, well, it's been good listening to you guys. I'm gonna go into Walmart and get some bird seed.
Nice. Birds are beautiful.
So
Tiny
have a good
dinosaurs,
weekend.
but beautiful.
always good to hear from you.
You
Later,
too,
Mark.
brother.
By the way, go listen to him read was it chapter 2 from Sartori's book. Mark
Yeah.
could make a living reading books. I don't know. It's got that voice. And it's just the right meter and
I love that.
tone, and it just
He's
hits it.
a storyteller.
Yeah.
That's a lost art.
There's a really good opportunity here. We could just restart On Ramp Radio right now. I can just remove myself and y'all can have just a 30-minute On Ramp Radio.
I don't even know what that is. I apologize for my ignorance in your little group.
No, On Ramp Radio was an interview, kind of an audio only interview program I did for my channel. I did I don't know how many I did, 6, 7, something like that. And the problem is he stepped out. I don't have this
Preparation
mustache is
material?
out of control. No, I don't have the block of time.
Yeah, you were saying you were going to go.
But what I was saying is it'd be great to spend a couple hours interviewing you, Al, to get your origin story and talk about stuff you like to talk about. But to kind of because I don't think anybody's done what's called a rando. Do you know what randos
I'm
are?
familiar with that now. Absolutely.
Okay, you need to be randoed by somebody, but we could do it I'd reboot On Ramp Radio just to rando you, is what I said. And because it'd be fun to have that discussion. I don't know if I could keep up with your knowledge of Indian philosophy and Buddhism, but it'd be fun to at least hear you talk. And I probably know enough to know what questions to ask.
Well, see, here's where I'm weird. And I think it's an artifact of having studied it for so long. I don't speak in terms of one pattern. I think it's what Nietzsche wrote about Emerson, who inspired Nietzsche. Yeah, people forget that. It's circles upon circles, concentric circles. So I can speak the same patterns. We were talking about this with the self in chat. I can talk about it in Buddhist context, in like whatever you want. I will just say, and in a lot of these, when you start to see these patterns, I can even speak in what inspired Jung to see this pattern as a universal idea, the Chinese Book of Change, right? So yeah, I don't find like there is in chat. It was a funny thing. I just put that in there because even in academia, people oversimplify everything. So I put in those weird terms for a reason. We use them for a reason. It's called the Prasangika Sotantrika quandary or disagreement. It was this idea, is it mind only or is it illusion only? But people never talk about there was a third path. Later, there was a merging of those two paths to say, well, yes, everything is mind only, but what perceives the Maya, the illusion, right? So yeah, exactly. So that's why we still use these silly terms. And this is why I mentioned Yogacara versus Madhyamaka, because they're mostly taught as two separate paths. Yogacara is considered gone and disappeared, and Madhyamaka is now transformed to what the Buddha originally taught when he after he had his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, which was a middle way. But it's more than that. It was like a couple different schools. So anyways, I digress. But yeah, that stuff I find fascinating because when you study this stuff long enough, you start to see, this is why I love Vedanta, because they honor a lot of prophets from a lot of different traditions because of this argument that if there is a true God, there is a natural, multifaceted way to approach that. Like sometimes I make an argument that there is only one path to enlightenment, to betterment, but there's 8.5 billion maps to that destination. Anyway, so I personally think when you start studying some of this stuff, and I've talked to this, and this is, I think, a clear distinction. Don't misunderstand. My professor misunderstood it first when we first started our 10-year study journey. When I asked some of these questions about, there's a synergy between Buddhism and the idea of bodhicitta and how we talk about what is the self in other traditions. And at first he thought I was very Vervaekian and I wanted to maybe start blending traditions into something, you know, but I was just looking at what it's a lost word in English, syncretism. This idea that if we are universally human, right? Point to Genesis chapter 9, right? If we're all blessed by this same covenant, then, you know, I wonder if that's what Francis was getting at when he was trying to allude to multiple paths to divinity. I don't know. What do you guys think? I got a little rando on that too. I apologize. Passionate about this stuff.
That's good.
Yeah. I don't know. If that
What do you think of what do you think of Nagarjuna? Are you
I'm
a fan
huge.
of him?
That gets into exactly what I'm talking about. Nagarjuna. Well, forget about the silly names, but this is why we talk about these guys, right? Kamalashila. It points to a period in Christianity. The syncretism could be Augustine. In Vedanta, it would be Swami Vivekananda. So it's these great teachers that it's almost like there's a thought experiment in Western philosophy. If I were to say Socrates is dead, this is almost like a koan in its multi-layer approach. So one, there's the question, the guy we know historically is Socrates. Is he dead? Is what he taught dead, right? The Socratic method. Or is it something more than that? Is it still alive, but it's within us? In Greek, phronesis. In Sanskrit, anumana. It just means you've always known this, but you have to awaken to it. That's like a kenosis or a koinonia in Greek to the Christian. That's tathagata garba. That's what I was trying to say in chat. They use the silly terms only because they're trying to do the same thing that I think Western therapists do. They either find one path that seems to help the most of their patients, so they go and argue this is the only path, or they're trying to differentiate themselves from other paths, so they redefine, right? The example I give is you'll find trauma informed or trauma sensitive, and they consider those two separate paths, but they're technically just the same. But I digress. I apologize. But I love Nagarjuna. I think he's one of many that we should be teaching because it talks about this finding a middle way when you're searching.
I found certain things of his helpful. But there's someone else here. Denise, is that who's there? Again, my screen is a little bitty thing right now. I'm on my phone, so I will defer.
Yes, I don't know how my quality is right now, so I try to stay muted unless somebody asks me to speak. I'm only speaking when spoken to because of the mute of the mic thing. I don't know. Do I sound okay now without too much interference?
There is a medium amount of interference. I can hear your words mostly.
A little bit of feedback because I think she's on the speakers in a laptop or a tablet. So it's picking up it and feeding back through.
And the thing is, I try to close down the, because I have to go to YouTube to get the link. And on a tablet, it doesn't really close down the windows so easily. Let me go back and see what I can do.
Have you tried, really quick, have you tried echo cancellation in the settings? If you tap settings and then audio, and there's a little check mark a little box that you tap, it will do in StreamYard, it will do echo cancellation.
Oh yeah.
That might help.
Okay.
It's very effective usually. Yeah, give it a shot.
Cool. And there's also a reduced mic background noise. That might help as well. I'm going to turn my, well, I don't want to break it.
Yeah, that actually helps too. You'd be surprised. It works really well.
I'll turn it on next time I'm in here. Because I'm afraid I might break it. I have bad luck with technology. All right, what happened? Did I do something?
We're all
No,
good.
Denise is muted right now, so I think she's in the settings.
I thought it was me. Okay, good.
You know, earlier the general asked differentiate syncretism and cherry picking. And then a little further down, we have Mr. William Branch saying cherry picking can pick from one tradition, not just many traditions.
That's a good one.
Syncretism is perennialism. You find mental phenomena across multiple traditions.
Yeah, that's a little closer to it.
And Chad the Girl Dad is annoyed by trauma hustlers to no end.
Oh, yes. And I hate that. In fact, someone in the chat once pushed back and said that, Traum is German for dream. And I said trauma comes from, this idea, right? That trauma technically is any experience that you haven't properly integrated and you're reliving in the present as if it was happening now. And I was pedantically corrected that it goes back to the Greek, but so much of our language, transcends that. And they're right, but who defines that? It was the German experience. And what's funny, heavily influenced by the American transcendental movement, but we don't usually talk about that. But yeah. Trauma is overdone because I call it the tragedy of trauma, because trauma doesn't have to be what we consider it, a traumatic experience. And that's the tragedy, because it doesn't have to be a tragedy or a trauma. We just don't, I argue, we don't teach people how to prevent trauma initially. That's where I think people fail. We try to pretend like life isn't gonna, what did Mike Tyson say, right? Nobody's plan survives a punch in the face. And we all know we're gonna get a punch in the face, but we don't think about that until after it happens. And Carl Friston, he's been employed by an AI company lately, so we haven't heard much from him, but he invented this idea about free energy. And just to boil it down, the brain is a predictive matrix. It's trying to predict what the world's going to happen to us, because supposedly we got to live in the future. Otherwise, we'll be reacting too late. And so the argument here is, if you try to deny reality, and this is where I think Grim Green is awesome. Or Grim Grit, yeah. It shows a misspent youth of, not youth, but younger time when I was quitting smoking with vaping. But anyways, I love his idea of LARPing to reveal the real. And I think that's, I don't know. I think it's what we're missing here. We're all, someone told me you guys were into the prophilicity idea in the past, but you're not anymore. You've moved on. I don't think we've moved on. I think we're still stuck in an identity crisis that is still trapped in, we all think we're the profiles. But anyway, sorry, I digress.
Okay, Denise, let's give you your first word. How you doing?
He just triggered me bad.
Yeah.
He did. You can't mix any kind of authentic faith talk, regardless of the background of the faith, with LARPing. I'm sorry, it's a poison pill. It's kind of like what you run into in some churches, and I've even, as a Catholic, it's turned me off to a lot of the Novus Ordo people, because they have, and you see this in a lot of Pentecostal and similar groups as well, where they take prayer and they actually turn it into spell binding witchcraft type of stuff. They use it so wrong that they're actually engaging in black magic, and sometimes don't even understand it. And when you get into LARPing, you're entering a realm of satanic ritual. Now, I know some people who are deep scholars of religious tradition are going to say, well, wait a minute. All of ritual is LARPing in a sense, because especially if you're from the Catholic traditional background as I am, where you have pageants, and I grew up with the actual festival promenades, parades that would go back. I forget what we call them. We didn't call them parades. Processions. The processions that go back to medieval times. Yeah, you put on costumes, you're playing roles, but you're not LARPing, as the modern sense is coming on and interacting with unsuspecting public as something you're not. And it's being done by a lot of political extremists on both sides, all sides of the spectrum. But it's part of the Anton LaVey tradition of Satanism, and it's part of the whole rock and roll thing, where you get somebody to play the role until they become the role. that's why I think Christians get enslaved, because they think, well, great, we'll get people to pretend to be good until they become good. But it doesn't work that way. Not in my opinion, anyway. That's my rant. I just think it's, LARPing, you've got to be real subtle about whether you're doing theater and you don't break the fourth wall, you let people know it's theater.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're actually in a LARP according to the way it's being done in social media, I don't think you can do that as any kind of Christian, or also I know some other religions do. In fact, I just named one. Anton LaVey Satanism is a religion. But that's where you got to be careful, because you're into their way of doing things.
Well, what I like in it too. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so I agree with you completely. And what's funny is we can connect it to two big things. So first, Augustine, right, where he said he was a sinner and he's a sinner now. So he's LARPing at being, what was he, the bishop of Carthage? I can't remember where he went in northern Africa, and pretending to be something he wasn't until he became what would you call it? Well, an example that we look to. But I'll give you a better example. So I was in a Hindu Academy YouTube a few weeks back, and it's actually a fairly high level discussion of Indian philosophy. And we were just discussing Shraddha in Sanskrit. This is faith. And I've always argued, and it's always been so, because my professor is one of the foremost professors of Sanskrit, and we've discussed this, so I know I'm correct on this, that it's odd, because most languages, we were talking about this faith and trust, most languages have with it, they don't just say faith, belief. They say it isn't, when you're talking about LARPing, they explain that you have to do it with intention, with devotion, with commitment. That's actually part of the understanding of what Shraddha means in Sanskrit. It's devotion and commitment. And from that comes confidence, trust, whatever you want to call it. That's present in Hebrew. It's present in Latin, in Greek. This idea that if you're not doing it with the right devotion, unlike the Greeks, I think that was the criticism of the Greeks, that they were going through the motions, or the Pharisees. They were going through the motions, and I see that often in the West with the Buddhists as well. They're just going through the motions, and they think that they can be. Think about it: the parable of the lady that gave all of she had in her purse versus the Pharisees who gave just a couple coins from their over full thing. And so, just a couple of weeks ago, they, for some reason, are now explaining that Shraddha is both a good and a bad faith. And this shocks me. And I did a little deep dive, and it's mental colonization. They've taken on the Western concept of faith as something that can be good or bad, because it's not extant in the Upanishads and the Gita. I did the deep dive. Shraddha is only when you do something with devotion and commitment. So if that makes sense, so what we're talking about here is what the Vedantins say, because I've seen the question asked by some of the foremost practitioners and teachers of Vedanta. People will say, well, what if I don't have faith? They said, come and see, come and do with devotion and commitment, with respect, right? And they said, faith may come. Does that give you an idea of what I was getting at?
Well, I think you're talking about practice as opposed to LARPing. Because if, for example, and this happens to a lot of people who grow up in a church and they go through a period of saying, what is all this? I just accepted it because I grew up in it. And they go through a period of time in which they go through the motions and they don't feel the solidarity with the other parishioners. They don't really, they're beginning to doubt everything. And but through continued practice, they work it through and say, well, wait a minute, this is what it's supposed to be about. Or maybe some things happen that show them, well, this ritual of the faith was not for you at the time, but now your uncle is benefiting from it, or they go, whatever, they come back around. And so they may have had a period a feeling like they were LARPing, but I think that the LARPing side of it, it's more outward. It's more like if you're promoting something that you really don't believe in, but you're doing it, you know. And a perfect example, okay, I had a very bad fallout with some fellow Catholics years and years and years ago, and it was over the pro-life thing, which I'm extremely pro-life, but very leery of a lot of the activity around it that people misunderstand. And one of the big problems within the Catholic pro-life movement has been an erasing of the history of actual prenatal medical realities that the Catholic Church has always allowed for medically necessary abortion. And that is something that a lot of people don't even realize, because they don't really know about all the different ways pregnancy can be non-viable. And so there's that. But the real thing that got between me and some beloved fellow parishioners was they decided to set up a pro-life ministry, counseling ministry for unwed mothers. And I was, oh yeah, I'll like to help with that, you know. And then it turned out that their whole plan was to bring the young women, you know, trying to help get them away from the abortion clinics, because a lot of people also don't realize that a lot of abortion is actually enforced. It's not by choice. The young women are not given a choice. Even older women who are married and pregnant are pressured to defend their idea that they're going to carry the baby to term. That's something that most men don't know, because you never get handed those medical papers. You never go in for a prenatal checkup and get handed those papers. But we do. We women do. I mean, I'm past that age, but I know it happens. But anyway, the issue was they were going to bring these young women into this counseling and then focus the counseling entirely on proselytization and conversion. And I was arguing that, no, I don't care if the young girl remained in whatever bizarre belief structure she's in. I want to help set up the clinic, the counseling thing. You know, some of us refer to it as clinic. The counseling service as helping her make the decision as to what's right for that baby. It's and 90% of the time best that the baby be born. And if you can't raise it, you know, we used to have inside the Catholic Church, we used to have a strong adoption process through which young women could give up the baby and go back to life. And, you know, they did not bear the scars, the traumatic scars of having aborted. They did not bear, because they lie to them. Another part of the lie is they don't want to discuss the hormonal aspect, that even if you fully support abortion and want to have one, your body goes through a hormonal spike of nurturant maternal hormones that then drop into acute depression at the loss of the baby. And that has nothing to do with belief or philosophy. That's the physical body. So the young woman who's upset that she's pregnant seeks an abortion, but within a few days or weeks, if she's not quick about it, that hormones kicks in, and suddenly she's not so sure about it. And all these things happen, and we have a high suicide rate among young women because of this. Anyway, I digress, but the point is, the LARPing was, we were going to LARP as if we were all about saving the baby and helping the young woman make the right decision. And these guys wanted to LARP it so that they could turn it into evangelism, which also, as a traditional Catholic, we were taught that evangelism is a heresy. And that's going to get me in bad with a lot of Christians out there, but hey, I love you. But anyway, that's my rant on where LARPing leads. It leads into this realm of betrayal, really. You're betraying a lot when you do that, and you're betraying your own soul in certain regards, because you're putting yourself, you're saying you know better than God. You know what kind of lies to tell to somebody to get them to convert, whereas it's between the Holy Spirit and that person. If the Holy Spirit calls them to convert to the faith or rediscover the faith that they were born in it, or maybe the Holy Spirit says, you know, stay out there in the wilderness and learn a little bit more, and then you're going to come back when it's time. I mean, we don't know what's going on between any soul and the Holy Spirit. So that's me. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I'll mute.
Al, have you read anything about? Oh, Mark Parker, jump in. I see you.
I just wanted to say I'm loving it. No, that's good. Go ahead, Ethan. I just wanted to say how much I appreciated that.
Because one of the things about LARPing that interests me is I think I heard Vervaeke say this in an interview, but I've heard it other places as well, is children learn through playing pretend.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if anybody has any just information or interest in that, but I've been thinking a lot about the idea of LARPing as, and Al, you mentioned this with Augustine, is you pretend to be something, and in that process of pretending, you become that thing, and then you find yourself as something other than what you used to be.
Absolutely. See, that's the thing. This is what I mean by syncretism. This is what Nietzsche tried to explain what the self is, your ultimate self, right? The Übermensch. He said, make it your template, this ultimate being, right? Jesus, the Übermensch, the Bodhisattva, right? Which just means the ultimate being of wisdom. So you're not just the best version of yourself physically, but spiritually. That's what we miss. Nietzsche taught this Gestalt thing, but it's modern psychology. It's not just internal family systems that can turn some people off, because they're literally trying to strip the spirituality out of this. It's founded in Jungian psychology, which is founded in Christianity. And the idea here is you have to aspire to something greater, right? What is it? Is it Genesis 8:21, where it says that man is essentially born evil? So that means we have this tendency, and I think that's what original sin is about. And Hemingway said we're meant to the only honorable thing is to be better than your previous self. I go one step further and I say, if we're not being better, we're getting worse. That's just the way the human works. And so I think when people miss this idea, that's the universal truth, that we're always faking it, right? Because who you think you are isn't you anymore. That was the person before. I just published this on Substack today. Literally, it's weird. It's universal. And Christian Baxter said it so perfect. Like, even lawyers, they call it their practice, because they're pretending to be these great, advocates, but they're not. Everyone, and I love this because look at the whole hubbub recently where some of these officials really kind of ruined the reputation of many companies. And the people responsible were like, well, you got to fake it till you make it. Everyone feels like an imposter. Well, that's true. And Nietzsche said, if you are carving for yourself a new path, then you're going to feel unfamiliar. You're going to feel like, am I doing this right? But if you're just pretending to be someone else, it's ridiculous. You should know exactly what you're doing because you have the template right there. So I argue the self is you try to emulate your betters, right? Your idols, whatever you want to call it. And when you fail to be them, where you land should be your authentic self. Does that explain my take on self and what we're here for? And LARPing.
It's an explanation. Do I understand it fully? No. Others, go ahead.
Well, the thing about the children pretending, I don't watch enough. I'm starting to try to understand Vervaeke in a systematic way. I picked up bits and pieces of his stuff, and I don't fully understand him yet. But the child playing pretend, it's a Piaget stage thing. If you really want to understand the process, you have to look to Jean Piaget, who was a mid-20th century psychologist in child development. And the child's brain is different from the adult's brain. So when a child is playing pretend, he's engaging in an exploration of what it means, like pretend to be his daddy, and everyone, you see TikTok videos all the time of some little child, copying daddy, but they're doing it biologically in a very different way than an adult, because they're exploring what it's going to mean to become this person, and actors do the same thing in a certain respect, but they to say that, like, to pretend to be good, and of course I also have a problem with the interpretation you're giving of original sin as being evil. That's another difference, I think, between traditional Catholics and modern Christianity, is that modern Christianity tends to be black and white. There's good and there's evil. Whereas we had purgatory and venial sin versus mortal sin. There was something else, I forget, it's some kind of innocence. I forget what it's called, but it's one of the reasons why evangelism is not really favored by the traditional Catholics, which is that your amount of sin that you do is dependent on the amount of knowledge you have that the thing is wrong to do. So a sincere pagan who's trying to do the right thing with the best of what he believes and what he has learned and also has spiritually understood is seen as being innocent until he understands, either through an internal epiphany with the Holy Spirit, which can happen, or through having been witnessed to and accepted, understood the witness, then it becomes sin after that. And the same thing for Christians. And LARPing, it's like, it's tied to this other thing. And it's not really pretending. And if you start pretending it the way a child does, you're probably entering a psychotic break, because you're believing yourself to be something. In fact, that's the pressure that shows up in a lot of the new Pentecostal groups, where they expect to see somebody pray in tongues, and if you don't pray in tongues, you're not really saved. And some people teach that way, which is way off from what the original scriptures are and the original old pre-television practice was. Because you can enter a glossolalia that is not a gift of tongues, but that is a psychotic mode, and it's actually that's why I have a very strong reaction against even thinking about LARPing in connection with one's Christian path.
Can I go back to the authentic self? Sorry, Ethan, if you want. I think there's a couple ways that a couple concerns, I guess, I don't know how to put it, regarding the authentic self, Al, is that I think from one perspective, my answer is the authentic self is essentially empty. We attach things to it, but in the end, it's like layers of an onion. You just keep peeling back and peeling back until you find nothing. From the Christian point of view, just say for the Paul, I'll just even go more narrow than that. From the Pauline point of view, in Romans, we see Paul saying, "No one is good, no, not one." For chapter 3 of Romans, and also Paul in Romans, the authentic self is a slave to sin. This may or may not fit well within with a syncretist point of view. I don't think it's necessarily an exclusively Christian point of view, but I do think the reason I am a Christian is because I essentially have found that I agree with Paul, and that the only authentic self is the new Adam, the second Adam. I must be born again. This body of Adam must die. The first Adam must give way, and This is 1 Corinthians now 15, chapter 15. Must give way, must die, and rise again with the new Adam, Jesus Christ, and resurrection. I only find my authentic self in him. And how do I find it? Now we jump over to Philippians 2. I find it on the cross where I die and he lives. So this is where my the level, I can do a lot of, I can find a lot of similarities in various traditions. And I do find it absolutely fascinating that the bodhisattva concept within Buddhism arises exactly at the same time Jesus Christ makes an appearance in the world. I mean, it seems like it's astonishing how close together they come. And it's amazing to me. The ideas about Christ and the ideas about the bodhisattva, just amazing. And they're thousands of miles apart, or at least hundreds of miles apart, and they arise together. It's an amazing thing. But in the end, I ultimately come down and become a Christian because of just what I said. That is, my authentic self is in Christ. What do you think? What do you guys think?
Well, first, a little correction on history. We used to think that the Silk Road was limited, and the Bodhisattva idea was separate. But I'll give you two little bits. We've come to realize that not only was it more extensive than we thought, it actually forked in Damascus, just up the road from where Christ grew up. So he may have been exposed because there was Chinese and Indian and all sorts of Samarkand, to and fro, people.
Oh, no doubt. I totally agree. No doubt. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the Christians didn't influence the Buddhists or the Buddhists influenced the Christians. We just don't know which one influenced who.
Well,
we really don't.
I'm never ever gonna, don't worry, I'm never gonna push that. What I mean is, in school, I was pushed this narrative, and I could explain it in economics as well, this lie that they keep teaching. But this lie that there wasn't this interaction, and there was. But I'm not saying anyone was influenced. What I'm getting at is, historically, we thought these ideas evolved separately. But in reality, when you look at the map and you look at the timelines, what might have happened, and I'm not saying this directly with Christ, but that's a little weird, and I actually don't support that idea. What I mean is, I used to teach that Greek Buddhism is, Stoicism, Epicureanism, and Pyrrhonism. That's my little area of forte, is Greek Buddhism, right? And everyone used to make fun of me until a few years ago, we dug up a new temple that showed that I was right. By hundreds of years, history was wrong, and we thought that the Greeks didn't interact. Like my professors used to argue with me and say, "Well, there's no. Pyrrhon of Elis went through India on campaign with Alexander, but they weren't there long enough, and then there was the language barrier, and yada yada yada." But fast forward today, we see there is more of this interaction. So when I talk about this stuff, what I'm talking about is, I mean that it's what I call term wars. So you're 100% right. And Jung saw the same thing. T.S. Eliot said the same thing, that they didn't realize they had everything they needed at home. Thomas Merton said the same thing until they went out. And follow me here. I've actually researched this. I keep getting asked why there's so many Jews in Buddhism, particularly Zen Buddhism. And my takeaway is, they can come to Buddhism, feel like they're devoted and practicing, but they don't have to put in the extensive and deep-hearted devotion required in their original faith. And I think that's what people are seeing. T.S. Eliot said it. Thomas Merton saw it. When they went to another faith and they thought it was better, the grass is always greener. And so they were putting in, not that LARPing, I'm pretending, like at home, like Denise was warning us. Well, everyone expects me to do it, so no. Thomas Merton, let's use him as an example. Well, he became very devoted. And that's where he found his devotion, his focus, his whatever you would call it. But just like Jung, he came back home to his original tradition, right, which was Christianity. And honestly, as far as for Denise, the only thing that I wrote down is plain and simple. If you want to read St. John of the Cross, he wrote about the ascent of Mount Carmel. Everyone knows about the dark night of the soul. Well, I can boil pretty much the whole book down to one thing. He said, these things are not understood when sought. They're only understood when practiced and found. right? So this is Christian at its very heart. This idea that we have to iterate. We're not going to be it. In fact, it's Teresa of Lisieux's Little Way. She said, "Who am I?" All these awesome examples of previous saints and Carmelites. Well, she thought, I'll do little things and I'll do them well and I'll do them with devotion and commitment. Do you follow what I mean? That authentic interaction.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. What do you mean by authentic self?
Well, it actually, so when I say authentic self is it goes back to any tradition. It's this idea that, so when I quote Genesis 8:21, I don't mean that God was saying we're evil, evil, evil. I think what he was saying is we have this tendency to be lazy, is what I call it. Like, I'm not saying inherently evil. I think, because look at, was it Bonhoeffer that said that evil thrives when good people do nothing? So that's my argument here. So when I say authentic self, I mean it's in Buddhism, it's in Vedanta, it's in Christianity, it's in Chabad. This idea that we've lost our true self, covered it with whatever you want to call it, to Nietzsche, tradition, expectation, but the world, John. How about John in the Bible, right? This idea of be in the world but not of it. The reason why the gates for the rich person is narrow. It's because they're so tempted to be of this world, attached to this world. And that's such a Buddhist thing. The argument is we are attached to life and death over and over again, this Dharma chakra, because we're attached to becoming. But I argue it depends on the type of becoming, right? Because that's the next level. Remember I told you about this duality and non-duality within. So you can't throw out the self. It's got to be this tool. And you fake it till you make it, because you're not going to ever experience the self. And that's what they teach you after you learn the lesson, that you keep wanting to be reborn as this selfish being. Then they teach you, oh, but you're going to have to live a few, maybe 10,000 lifetimes as this perfect being before you reach this authentic self. Do you know what I mean by that? So this authentic self is what in yoga, the translation of yoga is that connection to self, right? Cicero's religio, religare is another one. This idea of it's this connection to God. But if you look at those two words, religio and religare, it's a connection to God. But what is the passage? The passage is a path. If you look at religio, it's the path you follow with devotion and commitment, and the path exposes itself. And I think the self is the same darn thing, right? Once you start to realize that, oh, I'm not the guy who prefers blue and, likes to drink beer on Sundays. That's just one part of who I am. And when you get over that, does that make sense at all? Or am I just wasting my breath, making noise here? Apologies. You look...
No, you're making some sense. I'm not saying. I don't know if you answered my question though, because it's
the authentic self is the divine self that we have corrupted by thinking we're of this world and we're of this body. It's what. Okay, long story short, you guys were talking about this earlier. There's this great author who talked about where faith comes from, and I think the biggest takeaway from that book is not where faith comes from. It's the fact that when we're young, almost pre-verbal, we realize we're more than the self. We're more than the parts, more than what you can see. A child realizes that the authentic, true self is consciousness, is the self, the soul, whatever you want to call it. And tragically, we somehow train ourselves into disbelieving that to be so. And I think Yeats said we're meant to uncover that veil of Huxley to reveal our senses that realize that is, that image of God is truly our nature. Does that make more sense? What I mean by that?
Okay. Let's see what we can do with it.
If I'm just,
I don't think the Christian view. The problem. Here's the problem. As I said Christian. I'm going to say Pauline Christian. I'm a Paul, and maybe the Gospels feed into this too. Very clearly that. There is a sense that the human self, the human identity, whatever I think I am, is doomed. It's it's something that has to give way. And that it's it is something that needs to be rescued. It has to be rescued by the intervention of God. It's not something I can discover on my own. And I think I can like to John 3. I can point to the letters of Paul, as I already did, that I don't want to be so rude as to say that the idea of a divine self is an illusion, but I would say that both in Buddhism and in Christianity, I'd have to kind of say it is. That if you want any hope of coming out of this life, hopefully, you have to see that. Would be, and that's me being very aggressively evangelistic. I'm not trying to be. I'm trying to articulate the view that I've come down on with regard to this subject. Is that fair, Al? I'm not trying to be
so fair, dude. I run into this every day about one of my favorite power phrases in Vedanta, Tattvam Asi. And I run into these people who didn't study it properly. So they might have heard the term from Joseph Campbell. It means I am that, Tattvam Asi. And it's so related to Bishop Barron gave his sermon. And I recommend you go listen to it. It's beautiful what he talks about it. And you'll see this syncretism. And he talks about this idea of, if you ask, and I think this is later, we should talk about what happens earlier in the Bible, but when Moses asks God, like, who are you, right? He says, what is it? Esher, Ayer, Esher. And my dyslexia, I always get it wrong. Is it Ayer, Esher, Ayer? But don't quote me here. It means I am that. And it essentially means I'm everything. I'm all that. And that's what Tattvam Asi means. But I run into so often that people misread Joseph Campbell and why he loved that phrase. It's not pantheism. It's panentheism. You get the difference? This is the Shema manifested. So it's not I am God. It's God is everything, in everything, because of God I exist. It's truly the Shema made manifest, if that makes sense. And it's no different in any of these traditions if it's taught properly. You are not God. And what I joke about in French, there's this expression that I've created called, or not created, I'm sorry, wrong English, but I use au bas du ciel. It's a play on this expression that you're not the center of the universe, is, you know what I mean, is the English equivalent, but au bas du ciel says it better in French because you're not the hinge pin in the universe. That's like the initial, what do you call it? Thought experiment of most Buddhism that we've lost. That was one of the first things I was supposed to do, was to sit there. And I did it in a cafeteria. And I looked around and I said, are all these people just actors on a stage? And I'm like, that's so selfish and disgusting. No, absolutely not. So when I hear Tattvam Asi, when I hear the self is impermanent, that's not a negative thing. What I mean is I'm becoming something better. Does that make sense what I mean? So when I say divine.
Well, divine better.
Getting closer to summum bonum. Like, in fact, Bishop Barron invoked that greater good, summum bonum. That's what we're talking about, right? Because I think as a human creature, we're either atrophying, you're getting worse, or we're getting better. And I think that's all we're defining here. And I don't mean to sound heretical. What I'm arguing is I see you leaving a lot of people out because you don't realize that, and as Kierkegaard says, doubt, I think, is your first step towards understanding. So I think we need to leave the door open to those, like I've said to you before, right, that I taught Buddhism without the metaphysics because I found that allowed people to be more open-minded to the lessons within. And we could talk about Matthew 14 too, because I could teach that differently than most people do. Because I think we don't have to have one or the other. Karen Armstrong said they used to teach this in 5 layers of interpretation, and we've lost that. And that's what I'm getting at here. I'm not trying to, do you get what I mean? I'm not challenging any doctrine. I'm trying to reveal maybe a deeper doctrine. Some people asked about mysticism before. Does it make sense? No. Okay, I get you. I'm a loon.
Uh-oh, I gotta step out. I gotta leave, guys. I gotta take a
Okay.
call. Bye.
It was cheers. Cheers. No. Yeah. That's the curse.
I think I get it.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I think I get it. I think what people do though is they confuse this talk about the self with the ego, and then that gets into a whole other layer of misunderstanding. But bringing up the old saints like Saint John of the Cross and Saint Therese of Lisieux, particularly Saint Therese of Lisieux, she's very interesting. She was actually assigned to me as my patron saint by the nuns. And it was because of this, her life is extremely interesting. Her relationship to her sisters and what happened with the convent in this year and all that. And she was taught, her little way was immerse yourself in the life you are given rather than seek escape from it. And the whole self thing, I think where it becomes something that's not authentic is if I say, okay, if I'm going to be a great Christian, then I'm going to have to do X, Y, Z, and either fulfill expectations that other Christians are placing on me, or that I've placed on myself because I've been reading the Gospels and so on, and just trying to decide that I'm going to have to follow the path of one of the people I'm reading about. That creates an inauthentic self, and then the whole issue and the issue of original sin being connected to evil. Like I said, I don't think the original sin is connected to evil. I think it's connected to weakness and imperfection that we can't achieve very much on our own. But it's like I say, there's a big dichotomy between old Catholic teachings and modern Christian teachings about that. But I think I understand the reason the Buddhists avoid the metaphysics. I think is also because our hard science is getting closer to metaphysics. I mean, when you start looking at these people like Penrose and Hameroff, and you really get deep into cosmic quantum issues, suddenly a lot of various spiritual traditions begin to fall into place. And then when you lay it down to decide, my feeling about the whole multi-religious thing is, as a Catholic, I can engage in all of these other belief systems, engage with them, learn about them, respect them. But as far as what I'm going to take upon myself, I step back and compare it to, the core canon that I was raised with. And usually it lines up. And I think we are living in a time that we are seeing it line up with hard science as well. And psychologically, the understanding of what Jung was talking about, there's a lot more hard science backing him up. And he goes right back to a lot of what Paul talked about in terms of the thorn in his side that won't let him go, his weaker self doing, he does what he does not want to do, and so on.
That's exactly what I was circling. But
the authentic self is not the ego, and that's the struggle, because we live in an ego-dominated culture.
yeah, the Vedantins struggle to explain it, but the way they explain it is you have the observer, the people that's living life and watching the person that is a construct that's looking through the eyes, but then there's an observer, right? The observee, that relationship. So you're meant to try to, and exactly, it's the ego versus your truer self, the one that isn't putting on these masks, right? Or profiles in the modern sense. Does that make sense?
Why should I believe in an ego?
Well, you have to. That's, I think, the horrible tragedy of it is
But why?
self.
Why do I have to?
Because it's
I mean,
the
like,
tool. to get to your true self. It's the tool, like your body. Think of it as your body, the ego. It's the ego is embodied. So it's what, think of it as the operating system to your body. So the tragedy of it is, it's the same as, like I said, Genesis 8:21. We're inherently born evil, but we can do good. And I argue that's what Nietzsche was saying with beyond good and evil. Like, if you can't have one without the other. I can't remember who said it, but all great achievement has to have its roots in great suffering. And so
Yeah.
the ego is the greatest tool, but your greatest barrier to this liberation. So that's why you can't just cast it out. You have to work with it. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm tracking. What I find, I don't know what the word is. What I don't understand is why the word ego gained such prominence.
Freud.
Because there was a long time where we were able to discuss things without discussing ego. And then the
You're
word ego appears. And
Yeah.
now it's like anything we're talking about, we need to use the word ego to explain something.
Mhm.
I guess my issue, and it's not even that big of an issue, but like, you can't, like, no one can prove there's an ego. So now I'm operating like a faith space where I have faith in the existence of an ego, which is something that I cannot prove exists. And that's widely accepted.
Yeah.
And I was going,
Like
well,
a
this is kind of strange, isn't
Shared
it?
delusion. Yeah. Honestly, that inspired everyone hears, and it blew my mind because I'm a self-directed learner. So I don't go by what the courses are telling you to research. So when I fell in love with William James and Peirce, these polymorphs, these autodidacts of our history, William James is one of the foundational, what would you call them? Researchers, philosophers, psychologists. And he's known for pragmatism. And this always shocks me still to this day. Like I mentioned William James or Peirce, and they're like, oh, pragmatism. But no, he realized that strict empiricism, strict pragmatism left us wanting. So I think James was inspired by Nietzsche. Again, not someone who was denying faith or God, denying how we practice our faith and how we conceptualize God. And William James wrote something called radical empiricism. He realized that we have to see something greater than ourselves. Yeah, so call it the super ego of Freud, the collective unconscious of Jung. He didn't really name it. I call it an extra or a supra ego, right, to James. So he realized, as AA does, you have to believe there's something more than yourself. This is why I say you're not the au bas du ciel. You're not the center of the universe, right? The universe goes on without you, right? And that's what people misunderstand. Shakespeare's right. We're all actors on a stage. But are you trying to iterate? Are you being authentic? Do you get what I mean? That's the difference. Does that make more sense then?
Excuse me, but are you saying au bas du ciel?
Yes, at the base of the sky.
I'm hearing that as it means underneath heaven.
No, ciel just means sky. Just means sky. Yeah.
Really?
Yes. Yes. Well, that's
Well, yeah,
the thing. Yeah.
You were actually in the context of condensation. So you're saying no, we just live under the sky. We're here on Earth.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying you're not the center. The universe doesn't revolve around you, right?
Yeah.
This is this idea
Doesn't matter. Linguistic semantics. That's okay. No, I understand what you're saying. It's true. In French, that the word ciel means both, and I was listening more contextually. But the whole question about the ego thing, Ethan was saying, why does he have to believe in you? You don't have to believe in anything. The thing about ego is it's a very good description of what we know to be psychological processes. And the ego does refer to a limited function of the brain that relates to willpower and verbal cognition. And when I said we live in an ego-dominated culture, it's basically because if you go back to the 1700s and the Enlightenment, there was a break with the unspoken experiential psychology of people before that time. And coming into the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution and the sudden focus on material reduction life. You know, everything is a mechanistic machine. In fact, it even affected religion, because you had people like the deists. How do you say it? Deism. Jefferson, I think, was one who taught that Jesus, God, the creator, simply was a great clockmaker. He created everything and let it go, let it run like a robot. And so you get into all those things, but the ego, it's simply a description. And when a person engages in a practice like meditation to separate themselves and become detached a little bit, they experience a silencing of the verbal side of the mind, and still, but they don't lose who they are as a self, because the authentic self is not the ego. The ego claims to be the authentic self, but the authentic self is something we really can't. It's like you can't see your own face. You know, I can see my face in terms of I'm looking at the screen, but I'm looking at pixels on the screen that reflect my face. And no one has ever seen their own face. And it's like the ego is like the reflection saying, oh no, this really is your face. And when you realize, oh, wait a minute, that's not my face. I cannot see my face. Well, you can substitute the word self and come into the same thing. That's, you know, I mean, it's not, to get back to Ethan's statement, you don't have to believe in it. It's simply a description. And maybe there's another way to describe it that we just haven't thought of.
I think you just pointed to it, my dear, if I could. If you look at one of my favorite passages in Numbers. Oh, could you mute if you wouldn't mind, just because there's a little feedback? Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So if you remember Numbers 6:24-26, right? Talking about may God shine his countenance upon you. If you look at the Hebrew, it's an exegesis problem. So we translate face. But in Hebrew, we have this, and I was talking to the wife about this. It's so interesting. In English, face is facial. It means surface. But in Hebrew, your face reflected your true nature. Okay, so Numbers 24-26 is saying, may God shine upon you. May you be blessed by a connection with God. May you know him in your life. His face shine upon you, his countenance. And this is what we're talking about here. So you're missing the East and West, because I ran into this with the Shraddha. Now in the East, they think faith can be wrong faith, empty faith. They didn't used to be like this. And this is the exegesis, why it's great to study this. And this is where the ciel, that's sky. But if you're talking about heavens, they would say cieux, that's multiple skies, or paradis, that's paradise. And that comes from us, from the French. So yeah, le cieux is the sky. It only in context means heaven, right? I would say les cieux, right? You're not au bas du les cieux is what I would say if I meant you're not at the base of the heavens, right? And this is the difference between Hebrew. So the face in Hebrew means it's your true self, your authentic self, not a mask, not a fake self. But in English, the face often means a mask. So what do you guys think of that? That connection?
Well, you know what it makes me think of? The whole thing about the Chinese and similar Asian people having this concept of losing face being
That's not a real concept,
so
believe
extreme.
it or not, but yeah, that's a Western
Well,
concept.
I don't know. Maybe it's propaganda that we believe.
Yes,
that
that's mostly a
explains
Western concept. Yeah, we don't understand it. There is an idea of honor, but it's not what we think.
But that use of the word face would refer to something other than the physical surface. Although,
I
you know,
missed it. You're so dead on, my dear. I'm going to steal that from you if I could. That's perfect.
you have to pay me a nickel.
You're awesome. Yeah, no, you're dead on, and that's exactly it. In their concept, in fact, I love the story that the Japanese have a story of three faces, right? And we usually talk about two faces: the face that you show others, and the face that you show people you trust. But the Japanese have a third face that maybe you don't even show yourself, and this is the no tia sui in the Catholic faith. faith, right? The Gnosia Sui, your true self. Sorry, go ahead, Ethan. Chatty.
Oh, I was just doing tricks for the chat.
Oh, okay, yeah. But I was done anyways. But yeah, I agree with
Well,
that.
you know, it's funny because I was talking recently with, I think it was with Jacob Federecki, a Jew, and I was asking about the word in Hebrew. The transliteration is something like PA period NEH. Panay.
Pane. It depends on how it's pronounced. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the face
Which,
of God. Yeah.
the face, but it's interesting because it also gets translated as like before in English. So a lot of times in the Bible, when like the word before is there, it's the same word as face. And there is this like internal, external reality to that word where like the human face extends beyond.
I got glue all over my fingers here. Hold on.
Glue?
Glue, yeah. I was just gluing something while we were chatting, and then I got it over my fingers and didn't realize it until I smelled it. I'm a dumbass. I'm sorry, guys. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I've been chewing on that. Like, what does it mean that your face extends beyond your body? Like that face and presence in Hebrew are
exactly
the same thing, interrelated, connected. Your presence is within you, but extends without you. And like,
did he not explain Ruach to you? That God blew into us. He created everything with his words, which have a certain amount of power, a certain amount of effort for God to do. But he blew into us our soul, Ruach. And it's cool because the similar idea carries on since, and Nietzsche uses it for our soul. And it's a special soul. This is the idea. And I'm surprised he didn't say that. That's what's being reflected is our true soul, the soul given to us by God. Does that make sense then? Bring it all full circle?
I mean, it doesn't make sense because I get Ruach in the sense,
yeah.
But then there's also Nefesh, like your soul, your throat.
Yeah. That's the soul. Okay, this what gets some of them confuses. They are essentially the same thing. They're speaking to the same thing, but sometimes, and this is going to get you maybe taken down. Are you okay with this? Can I be a little blue collar here and, you know, maybe reveal something that not a lot of people want to talk about? Are you cool with that?
Roll the dice.
Okay. Well, some sects of the Jewish faith believe that they were given a special soul. So I think this is where this difference is. So some Jews believe that they have the special God-blown soul, and the rest of us have the word-given soul. And sometimes there's that confusion, but also you have to look at the exegesis. Sometimes they may have confused them, but I think that's where this idea gets in, right? I don't know.
So if there was a Jew here on stream, would they be angry with you for saying that?
No, they would just say, well, yeah, that's like people who study the Tanya, and you know, like that's not in the Bible because it is what do you say? What's that term for something that's outside the Bible? So yeah, they have plausible deniability, right? But as Jacob said in a recent podcast, he says that all Jews study the Tanya and Kabbalah, so they should all believe that they have a special soul, and I think that's discordant from the rest of the teachings, if that makes sense.
You know, there's a lot of books and there's a lot of humans, there's a lot of opinions, and
exactly.
We don't have to all agree with each other.
Exactly.
I do think it is possible to respect one another and to even move towards friendship with people who you strongly disagree with.
Yeah.
And if we can't attempt that, then I don't know what we're doing. I guess we're just laying in bed and wasting time.
What's a soul?
Yeah. We're not wasting our time. That's a pretty big question.
What's a soul?
Well, if I can explain something that I always thought was guiding for when it comes to this confusion, when it comes to, you know, what do the words mean? Because like you said, I run into this with vicissitudes in English. I love that word. It's my favorite word. I got it from a TV show, Alf. He went to ponder life's, he went to ponder life's vicissitudes in a monastery. And so I had to look it up. I'm such a dork, right? But I love it because it defines that it's all of the little missteps of our life. And I think it was Hermann Hesse said, a life looked at internally, honestly, is a series of missteps. But it also means vicissitudes. It also means our life is made up of those little trips. And this is why I love Nietzsche. He said, the secret to life is, he called it the eternal return, is to treat everything, and this is Teresa of Lisieux's little way, and Denise is going to love this, treat everything as God-given, amor fati, right? So good or bad, if you treat it as divinely inspired, given, whatever you want to call it, then you are living a divine life. Like, does that give you your full 360, or is that a tangent?
I mean, I think everything's a tangent.
No.
I don't know that I'll ever
I think some
experience
people-
360.
I think some people refer to that as radical acceptance. I've seen that phrase thrown around.
That
And
would be a
it does
modern.
relate to, like, yeah, it's kind of an atheistic borrowing of the concept.
Secular.
pop
Don't say
culture
atheistic,
stuff.
because some people aren't atheists. They just don't know better. That they're
Right. Yeah, I meant that secular is definitely the right word for what I meant. It's not concerned with what we're talking about. It's just they'll say it because it's cool. And anyway, I'll mute my mic again.
Denise, are you knitting? And if so, what are you knitting?
Sewing.
Sewing.
I'm sewing a cotton nightie, which I live. It's almost dangerous for me to say it because I've actually had to deal with people getting weird about it. I live without air conditioning, and I live in Texas, and I do it for a reason. I don't need to go into here, but I made a choice at a few years ago, and I have not turned on my air conditioner in 5 years. And one of the things I did it for was to figure out how did people manage all these eons before, because air conditioning has been around since the 1950s. And cotton I started experimenting with different fabrics, and I found this cloth, which is tobacco cloth. It's pure cotton. It's a very loose weave, and it wicks the sweat away from the body. It creates a total evaporation system. And so if you wear it when you're sleeping, you don't need air conditioning. And that's what I'm doing, is I'm sewing one of my, and like this that I'm wearing is linen. That's another thing. It's even better than cotton for cooling the body. And I was blessed with finding, I found like about 8 yards of linen at Goodwill one day, which linen is about $35 a yard, right? And I found about 8 yards for $10. So I made a bunch of things out of that. And it's really amazing how comfortable I am while other people are just dying of the heat. And they literally, you've got people literally dying because their bodies they live in an air-conditioned house. They jump in an air-conditioned car. They go to the air-conditioned office. They even work out in the air-conditioned gym. Their bodies do not learn how to tolerate heat. And and I realized as children, in my generation, we didn't have air conditioning. I grew up in New England, where you can get just as hot as Texas for a couple of weeks during August. The only difference is it's a short heat season. And we survived it. And I said, well, all these different ways. And one of the ways was the fabrics that we wear. And I just started developing this whole thing of trying to put together a comfortable, low-tech lifestyle. So I'm sewing one of my tobacco cloth nighties. And the tobacco cloth is pretty cheap because you buy it by the bolt. I think I paid $20 for a 10-yard bolt. I get about 5 nighties out of it.
the modern hair shirt, no AC.
For real.
Oh, it's a lot more comfortable.
Yeah, well, that's cool. But yeah, I had time, so I ran it through AI, and it understands what I'm getting at here. That I mean, sometimes it's used interchangeably. Sometimes it means the soul that interacts like on the earth. Sometimes it means, and so I put in the 3 levels of, the soul. But I think it's so much of our language is contextual, right? I call it perspectival understanding. And I think there's a quote, and it's funny too, because AI had a hard time tracking it down at first, but this idea that God brought the faith to the Hebrews because they had a little language, and it wasn't an insult. I meant maybe he perceived that we might fall into this term war thing, right? And if he brought the faith to people who only had a certain number of words and characters, that maybe we wouldn't be as confused and we'd be able to follow it better. I don't know. Thoughts on that?
It's interesting.
Why are you doing like a 24-hour thing? Like, what's up with that? Huh?
Why am I doing a long stream?
Yeah.
Because my fiance is out of town.
Say that again.
My fiance is out of town.
Okay, so that's like a reason why you could do it. What's the reason why you would do it?
Yeah, that's not a why.
Because I live in Anchorage, Alaska for 1 more month, and I have no friends here. And I've only been here for 2 months. And I could.
Winter was rough.
I could go hiking and I could go camping overnight. But my parents were just here for 11 days, and I didn't have the energy to go fight bears in the wilds. So I decided I'd come here and fight all of you. And I disagree with every word that's been spoken in the last 4 hours and 17 minutes. But here we are, and we won't stop. And I only have 26 more hours to go. Less than 26 hours.
Crazy.
That's wild.
Does that answer your question, T?
Yeah. So why are you up in Anchorage, Alaska?
So my fiance is in traveling healthcare. She's an occupational therapist, and we got engaged in Wisconsin. We both worked at a brewery, and I was the manager there. And she said, "Hey, I want to go travel. Will you come with me?" And I said, "Let's do it." So we've done that for a year. We get married in less than 3 months. I should be wedding planning, but I'm procrastinating. And what better way to procrastinate than a very long stream?
Let's go.
Can I be the pedantic philosopher and say that there is no procrastinating? That Hemingway said it, Nietzsche said it, Schopenhauer said it, that when we put our minds on idle, the great ideas come, right? And Nietzsche said only when we're walking, and Emerson resonated that. And I'll go one step further, that technically Hemingway said in A Movable Feast, he said, you gotta step away before you drain the creative well, or before you drain it dry, because it doesn't fill up as fast. So he argues that going off and doing something, he read mindless crime fiction, believe it or not, in French, but that's what he found refilled his creative well. So yeah, again, intentional procrastination. Oh,
yeah,
guys.
I'm sure at the end of this I will feel very full and want to write about a 30-hour stream, even if it's just like the subjective experience, a phenomenological account. I'm sure like this is an interesting experience just partake in, that I'm sure it will strike some kind of lightning in me to write about.
Well, that's what you're doing. You're becoming the man that deserves, right? Again, we're talking about you're becoming.
I want to be a husband.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like and that's, I think, where Nietzsche fails, right? Because he said, "Oh, women, they have this inherent value because they can bring to life babies," right? No. What about women that can't have babies or don't want babies? It's the society that we're creating. That is our destiny. That is our raison d'être. And what you're doing, right? Like this is, you can take it if you like, is trying to better yourself to embody the man that your wife deserves to marry. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I believe that's the whole idea of self, dude. It just goes 360. That's what you're meant to do. You're meant to try to embody something you're not, and hope that where you land is better than you would have been. It's almost like what they say with martial arts. Like I was taught this in boxing. You don't aim for the bag, right? You aim for 2 feet behind the bag. Otherwise, you're not going to put in all of your energy. And that's the whole idea. You don't just aim to be, no, you make it your passio, all consuming. You get it?
I get that one.
Yeah. That's the authentic
Let
self.
me,
Yeah.
can I ask you a question now?
Yeah.
This is Mark. What do you think of the simple faith of people who can't conceptually grok what you're talking about? I mean, who aren't intellectuals. I have the same question for all my Orthodox and Catholic converts who made intellectual journeys into these aspects of faith. They all tend to be kids from the top 10% of the class. They're the smart ones, the mostly mature, fairly privileged as a rule, one way or another. But for the bottom 40, 50, 60% of humanity who don't approach life philosophically, where do you go with that? Because it's one of the things that makes Pentecostalism, I think, so powerful and influential, is that it short circuits. It isn't when it's done. And I think it's done. If you want an example of Pentecostalism done well, I'd say look at Ron Copperman. And there's the authentic stuff, then there is the snake oil stuff. But he's the real deal, in my opinion, and I think he's a really good example of his tradition, if you want to call it that. But what do you think?
I completely agree, actually. And I'll give you my vulgar translation when I'm asked that question. Is I boil it all down. I used to say Buddhism, but that's because usually that's where the questions came from, right? Because people are more apt to ask questions about Buddhism than many other faiths, right? Because they're afraid of being judged. And I would just simply say the practice is simple. You can call it Sanskrit or Pali, Sati Sampajanya, which is to remember what you've been taught and bring it to all of life's activities. That's in Japanese, Zazen. But it's simple, I would say. Are you being a jerk? Live it as a mantra. Are you being a jerk? Don't be a jerk. Repeat. Just there's your mantra. Just are you being a jerk? Don't be a jerk. Repeat. And that's what I would share with people. I mean, it sounds vulgar, but that is the practice. We're meant, and I tell a little joke with it, that you can tell the difference between a good Buddhist and a bad Buddhist. And I could, again, extend this to any practitioner of any faith. You can tell a good one from a bad one because the bad practitioner will tell you how good they are and how often they practice. And the good practitioner will admit they struggle with their practice every day, every moment, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. And I think that's why we need to approach this in a secular fashion, because as the mystics will all say, this stuff is not experienced with our, what do you call it? Our physical being. It's what Yeats said. We have to develop the sensitive, what do you call that? Senses. We have to make them sensitive enough to understand it. I could talk about this. It's funny to me that, and I hate that you guys think that I'm not explaining this in a simple way, because I'm just a dumbass. I taught myself most of this stuff. I'm just one of you that have been trying to figure this out on my own. I never went to no fancy school. Yeah, I've taken a lot of courses with some pretty good professors and stuff, but yeah, no, I'm just like y'all trying to figure it out for myself. But I guess I've been doing it a lot longer. What Confucius said, if he could be given an extra 50 years in life, he devoted to studying the I Ching. And I've been lucky enough to spend the last 35 years studying the nature of self, is what I argue. As a Yogacara and Madhyamikan, I say that we've been studying the nature of self, of consciousness, of the soul. We've been studying it for 1,400 years or more. Right. So there's my rando in a nutshell. How's that?
Okay.
Right? No, it does not make sense.
I think it makes some sense. I'm not sure. Well, what do you see? Do you practice? Because Joseph Campbell said you really couldn't mix operating systems. Was his analogy?
No, you got to move
And-
between them.
Right.
Right. So if I go to a Catholic
I don't-
church, I practice as a Catholic. If I go to a Chen style Buddhist temple, I fit in and I practice. And I see this with Tibetans. Like the temple I used to practice at was technically both a Chen lineage and a Guanyin. So they both worship the Bodhisattva of compassion, and also were essentially a lineage of early Zen. And they practiced it like it was separate things, but they practiced it together. And we even had Tibetan practitioners, right? So diehard Vajrayana come in and they would practice with or separately. And we'd have Thai people come in. And that's something I don't see with people as comfortable with, like, because there's so many different Catholic rites. I find it weird, say within Protestant, you guys would be more familiar than I, right? Like that. You guys don't seem to flow within each other's and trying each other's. Like, do you get what I mean? I love the beauty of that you give yourself wholly to another tradition. And well, as Jesus said, come and see. You get what I mean? And what I find is if you're comfortable in your faith, in your understanding of God and the nature of your journey and whatever, practicing in another faith doesn't risk that, doesn't challenge that. Does that make sense? So, yeah.
I don't know if it's true. It makes sense. I don't know if it's true. I mean,
Well, it's never
there are
challenged my
limits,
faith.
right? There are limits of faith. I mean, like for example, I draw a very clear when people get very uptight about Pentecostalism, and that it looks. Did somebody say witchcraft or something?
Yes,
not yet, but you
was
did.
it Denise?
No,
Did somebody say that?
Denise actually mentioned it earlier. You were listening.
Mentioned it earlier, and I've made the same observation, but how I mentally, for my own purposes, made it the distinction. I compared it to most overtly to voodoo, and magical practices in voodoo are very to talk about self. They're very self-oriented, very self-aggrandizing. It's all about personal empowerment of the magician or the person seeking the help from the magician, and it's getting me in mind, getting my safety, my protection, my revenge, whatever. What's in it for me? And true spiritual gifting is always God given, the person who receives the gift is actually a vessel or a lens through which the gift is transmitted to others. So you seek empowerment through the Holy Spirit in, say, in the Christian or Pentecostal tradition, but do it from an orientation of to bless others, to bless the congregation. This is how Paul says. This is what the whole purpose of it is for: is to benefit the congregation. If all you're doing is benefiting yourself, then yes, you're engaging in witchcraft. But if you're there is such a thing as bad religion.
Yes,
is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I agree that.
And I wouldn't play with it either. I wouldn't encourage people to go off and get into who's the guy that Jimmy Page was into? He bought his castle or something like that.
Aleister Crowley.
Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, I wouldn't play around with those guys. I don't know how much. I mean, some people will say they're definitely demonic, and I don't know about that. I don't. I prefer not to judge because I didn't know him, but I would definitely not play with those things or those forces because I just don't see any benefit to it whatsoever. What I might learn would be all the wrong things.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't say that I would just. I don't think it's. Do you get what I'm saying now when I say that there aren't good religion? There are just simply religions or religious practices to avoid.
Well, okay. So, can I relate this to? I think it again resonates across traditions. So I get the question a lot about, and I'll stick to Buddhism, even though it still seems to be triggering to some. I get the question when it relates to tanha, which is often translated as desire. But I also get the question about like, oh God, what was the other question that y'all were talking about? Like intention and devotion. But so I get black and white, and this is the problem. Nothing in the world is black and white. In fact, that's the lesson of the Chinese yin and yang. It's that even within the dark, there is the aspect. And same as when someone was saying a male soul and a female soul. I think that's where Jung got this idea that we're both a combination of the animus and the anima. So the lesson here is we're a complex. We're like I don't know, how can I explain this? I actually agree with you. How can I say that? That it's just how we see this. I'm struggling to explain.
Well, can it be intrinsically just can we just say intrinsically evil? Can we say there's the great line from G.K. Chesterton where he talks about the pagans of late antiquity just before that gave way to Christianity, and he pointed out that they needed a new heaven and new earth because they had actually defiled their heavens and their earth.
The Gnostic idea. Right. Evil. You know?
They had soiled their world and needed a new one, and there's something to that. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Yeah, you brought that up because is that anyone? It's an everlasting man. He talks about. So I don't know about like pure evil, but there's better and worse evils, because what he says in that one is he talks about how like we can see the hand of God in the wars that happened before between Carthage and Rome, because they were both pagan, but Rome was a much more noble version of paganism than Carthage was. And it was the Roman Empire that was an appropriate world system for Christ to come into. It would have been much more difficult if Carthage had won, because you would have had a worldwide Carthaginian empire, where they were, so it's like to say they still practiced human sacrifice and stuff. So like, there's better and worse paganisms, which, it kind of speaks to just this thing of like, Christians tend to look at the Bible and one, I believe it's a real historical truth as far as, what it's saying about the things that happen in these nations, but it's like such a narrow sliver of history, centered on the Jewish people. But it doesn't mean that God wasn't also working in history in all the other nations of the world the whole time. And there's he was doing all sorts of things to prepare them for some who would come to not a more direct knowledge of him in the years between then and now, and probably some that are yet to come to that understanding. But it's all working together towards a plan. And God's certainly much more patient in his orchestration of that thing, because he wants it to kind of unfold in a specific way. So like there's definitely more and less and better and worse evils. But is there like, well, I mean, I guess the big problem is if there's something that's like ultimate evil, then it's something that God created. Whereas if evil is just the perversion of good, then it's more something that he allows. And I mean, I don't know. You can say if it doesn't bother you to think that God God certainly created Satan. To what end? It seems like Satan does a lot of damage, and then his plans always backfire. So that's it's not a fun realization to think about, like that God is behind those actions in some way, but it always backfires for Satan in the end, and God always triumphs. So I guess it works out.
Yeah. Sorry, my apologies. I didn't mean to. Oh yeah, Denise, go ahead.
Now, this whole evil Satan thing. If God did not allow evil to the extent that you describe, and then of course it backfires. If he set it up so that only the good that he created would exist, then we would not have free will, and we would the entire interaction of humanity with divinity would not, it wouldn't, it's just like the duality of good and evil doesn't have to require that God actually consciously created evil, but that he created a system in which evil could happen because it was part of the process of his engagement with humanity. And the whole thing about Satan's plans always backfiring, of course, gives us the ability to have forgiveness and the ability to recognize that people can move from an evil life to a good life. I think that's the way I explain it to myself. Anyway, that's the way I understand it. I'm open to other explanations.
Well, no, it's interesting because I often noted that, the fall takes place in Genesis 3, but in Genesis chapter 2, you still have this contrast between good and not good. Creation was good, but it was not good that the man was alone. And God then has Adam name all the animals, so he has to explore creation. He has to understand the context before God brings him the woman, so that he can then understand what the difference is between not good and good. It's not evil; it's just good and not good. But God doesn't just give him the woman right away when he says it's not good for him to be alone. It's God understands it, but then he shows it to Adam. He helps Adam to understand it through the experience of recognizing that none of these other creatures are a suitable partner, and then in contrast, the woman is. So, I guess you could say that's just a contrast between creation and not yet createdness. So there's still that contrast, but then the redemption process really answers the question of what happens when things go wrong. And the answer, when things go wrong, God does step in to make them right again.
Real quick,
That's interesting because
Marker, I muted you, so just make sure to unmute yourself. Just heads up.
Sorry about that. Sorry.
Yeah. The thing about I forget what I was going to say. The Adam being shown that the good and not good, and there's a whole lot of nuances to the whole Adam and Eve story. I mean, the fact that they were actually placed in a garden, indicating that they weren't really on their own from the beginning. I guess, of course, I'm not really good at chapter and verse. Was the placing of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, did that happen after Eve was created from his rib, or was Adam in the garden when God
places Adam in the garden, and then brings the animals to him?
Okay. So basically, I'm looking at it as a distinction, as a story of why we are different from the animal kingdom. Because there's always this argument, particularly among New Agers, about animals having souls. But there's this element of free choice about good and evil. We don't consider a grizzly bear evil for what it can do to a hiker, but a human being slashing a hiker to death obviously is going to be considered evil. And a grizzly bear doing it to a hiker, people immediately start asking, well, you know, how much was the hiker warned about the presence of grizzlies on that path, etc. Because the animal nature is not separated the way human nature is. And I think the careful attention being paid to Eve being created in response to the need of Adam, you know, okay, the feminists can trample all of that all they want, I don't care. The way the story is told shows that our relationship to male and female and all of these other dualities is deliberately by God made far more complex than an animal's nature in terms of all of this. I'm not sure where I was going with that, but that's kind of what it brought out in my mind.
Although I think that there, well, so, you know, there is, I think, just getting into that whole like creation mandate and what they were supposed to do. You know, it's interesting. Like God does make a command after the flood. He says that they have to put to death a person that kills another person, or you know but also an animal that kills a person. And you know, it's like animals are obviously lesser than people, but there is sort of a like some of their, I think you can attribute some of their violence to, or maybe all of it, or to the fall, because you know you have these animals that humans have domesticated, and they get better integrated into the world in which they live, and you can even see animals teaching things to each other. Like, so that law, like when an animal kills a human, like that you're supposed to put them to death. Some people might be bothered by that, but I don't know if you'd heard of this thing that some killer whale figured out how to like sink boats essentially by like attacking the hull, and then he started teaching it to other killer whales. And it's like, that's a bad pattern, that if they had killed the one after he did it, it wouldn't have spread the way it is. And I think it was also he was reacting to some inhumane thing that some fishermen were doing or something anyway.
That was an interesting story. Well, I followed that for a while, and they traced it back to a female killer whale who had either was involved in some kind of encounter with a yacht where a calf was injured or something, and she's the one who started specifically focusing on yachts. And then the practice spread because animals do imprint on each other, and there's all kinds of argument as to how much intellectual awareness is going on with that. But getting back to you kill an animal that has killed a human, I don't think the Bible is telling us that to do that as punishment. Now, if you kill a human being for murder, then that is considered as being more than just being rid of that person, but it is considered as being a punishment for the soul. The person presumably goes to hell unless, you know, the practice was to have the priest take confession at the last minute. But it's involved with punishment, whereas killing the animal is simply, you know, I see that as purely defensive, that the human race has to be able to defend itself. We don't have the strength of animals.
Well, it also has a selection benefit because, you know, they did this thing where they domesticated foxes in Russia. I don't know if you'd seen that one. And basically, it's like it's the same thing that basically happened that turned wolves into dogs. And they would select the foxes that were the least afraid, of the people, and then they would pair them together, and in each litter they would basically separate the friendliest ones, and then they would separate the most aggressive ones too. And they were trying to see how this would go. So, and basically they made two populations. They made super aggressive foxes, and then they made foxes that act like domestic puppies, more or less, or some a little bit of foxy behavior still, but generally speaking, not afraid of humans and friendly. And so in the same thing, it's like you don't want the like there was that lion in Africa that was killing, like, they made like a movie about it. It was like, but it was like based on a true story. It seemed like the lion was like literally hunting people, and it's like you don't want that lion to go have more cubs, because if it's, whether it's the learned behavior or if it's in the genes, either way, you don't want them passing that on. But you do want the gentle ones, or the ones that are respectful of humans. You let them go, because and it changes the population over time. Oh, I was going to say before, from what we were talking about way back, I went and found a link for Al. I put it in the private chat. So there's a YouTube video where this guy's talking about this website. I put the website there too, tips.translation.bible. And it's a website where they take translators who have translated the Bible into all sorts of different languages across the world, translate it back into English. And then you can search it verse by verse. And if they had any interesting problems because a concept doesn't exist, or they had to figure out for translation for a specific verse, they put the notes in there. And it's really interesting because, there's all these kind of like aspects of different mythologies that get tied in. And I was thinking about that because you said that the Hebrew was a little language, and I think that there's something where the knowledge of it, every time it gets translated into different languages, and they have to make we have to make some of those tough choices, but the knowledge actually expands. And I think that truth is in the Bible, but it actually requires the translation to come out. And this lets you see it without having to know all the languages, or just to a certain extent.
So. Yeah, I use Bible Hub digitally if anyone's interested. But that's actually, it's another funny thing. Talk about timely. The wife actually was making a joke about, right? There's a question: how many Bibles do you have? Well, I have as many as I need, right? Because I have a Hebrew and Greek. I don't have a Latin, which is funny, but that's a whole separate thing. I believe Latin is a fake language. It's not a real language, but we'll talk about that another time. But I have every English translation. I have French, and it's easier in French because there isn't as many, translations, same as Spanish. And so I think it's funny that you said that I'll give you an insight so I started as a young lad here in Canada. So my first introduction to translation was trying to understand people around me. But there used to be this, it used to be a practice among translators before there was computers, is you would translate a piece and then try to translate it back into the language, or even a different language. And you would trade your work with other people to see how clear your language and your translation was. And fast forward to the last few years, what I've been playing with, when I have been playing with machine translation, it's another great test. And that's an example of is how we live every day with AI already improving our lives. Because just a few years ago, when I tried this back translate idea that Nietzsche talked about, that we may get so distanced from our true nature that we might have to back translate ourselves. When I used to feed the machine learning translation back into itself, it would fail because it was so poor at it. But fast forward to today, it's fantastic. And it's almost starting to understand this contextual basis of language, because it sometimes will give you multiple choices. as to how you want to translate a particular passage. Right. And that's what I'm getting at. And you know what's funny? I used to be kind of a snob, and for years I avoid getting certain translations of different books and different editions because I didn't like the introduction or something. But I had my eyes open to little things like the Good News Bible or the Message. Right? Have you seen that translation of the Bible, the Message? I was shocked to see that sometimes they have a clearer translation. Surprisingly, yeah. So I agree with you, Michael, that the more you read, yeah.
The Message, yeah, that's an interesting one because it's like a paraphrase, but it was done by one guy, and that's what I didn't. So Paul Vanderklay was talking about it, that sometimes with these more academic translations, because it's done by one person, there is a sort of, they're actually like trying to maybe get a better sense of coherency as far as the meaning, whereas these other ones, it's done by a committee, and so it's like basically they're aiming for not making a dangerous mistake or something.
Yeah. There's a whole theory behind Bible, whether they're going to be literal or, you're so right. And you're right, because it depends on the Bible. Some of them, they'll break it down by chapter, but even then, that person, and I was talking about this morning, this is, I think, what Jordan Peterson meant by the Bible being a hyperlinked document. It's like say, a philosopher's work. I see so often that people don't read their entire corpus, because it isn't until you read the entirety of the work that you can start to see these connections. And I think you're dead on, because if you have someone who specializes in just the early prophets or the wisdom books, or like we saw with Jordan Peterson, I think he failed because he was uber specialized in Exodus and Genesis, and he missed some spots, but that's a whole separate digression. But it gets worse when they have multiple people working on one chapter. So I would agree with you fully, because you need to read the whole Bible, not be an expert at, but I see so many people, and Nietzsche warned of this, right? Uber specialists. They have mouths to speak, but don't have eyes or ears to hear or speak, right? They're too specialized in the Gospels or Revelation, and they don't see that it really does need to be read as a cohesive document. I don't know. What do you guys think on that idea?
Yeah, there was a guy who made it. I thought it was a really good idea. I kind of hate the way he did it. That he made this thing called the Short Bible, and basically it was like I don't know, a summarized version of the Bible, essentially. So it mostly good because it was trying to like explain the narrative so you can get the flow. No, it was not like Jefferson's where he just cut things out.
I was wondering. Yeah.
No, so it's like a 12-hour audio book.
Oh, nice. Yes, because it's what is it, like 72 hours normally, the Bible?
72. So it's about a 12-hour audio book, and
consumable.
And so then he kind of doesn't go over as much of like the Psalms and things like that, because it's aimed at that.
There's a lot of repetition. People don't realize that.
He just made some really dumb things where like he tried to and it's just his opinion, and he put it in there where that's he was talking about how like when they cross the River Jordan and it's dry, like he for some reason he doesn't even say like maybe it happened this way. He more or less I think he just says like a rock slide like happened upstream and then it was dry when they crossed it.
Oh, you mean he ignored the miracle of
yeah. Like, and I mean, I think maybe this was some of it was because he's thinking because it's like aimed at maybe the more materialistic.
It's a failure.
Or something.
Who's reading the Bible?
He really failed in that part, in that aspect of it. But I did think, and the reason why I was interested in it was because it's like, especially once you get past like once you get into like first and second Samuel and stuff, or you get past then, and then that like there's the prophets, they're all integrated into those narratives with the kings and the and then you have the whole other account in Chronicles, and it's hard to just get the flow.
It's a mixed up. It's
all the
not
way.
in order. You're
Yeah,
dead on,
yeah, and so and get the big picture, and because I mean that's the thing, because and just because they have it separate like that, because you read the prophets and then you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm jumping ahead a couple hundred years, or now I'm jumping back, and like, so
It's
so
confusing for most people to follow along because
Yeah.
we've seen it in movies. People don't like to jump around much, right?
Yeah,
It's just
and
maybe your
and
mind.
it's just because it's two different things. One is the direct speech of the person in that time, and then there's the context and the and they're not, and they don't, and they just say like in the year of this king, but you have to go back, and maybe you have to go back and remember what happened with the previous king or a few kings yet
They
to back
expect
up
you to know
so
that.
that you get enough. Yeah. So it's, I mean,
That's true.
that one that's always been like a little bit of a fuzzy kind of, just like, because I kind of like have like a mental like timeline of things, but it's like that it gets foggier at that part.
I think it does. It causes cognitive dissonance because I think this goes back to Carl Friston's physics idea of free energy. We don't see patterns in chaos. We picture patterns. We hallucinate patterns. The way I liken it is, what's common with hunters? For them to shoot at nothing. Because when you're sitting in stand or waiting for something to come out, everything starts to look like a moose or a deer. You know what I mean? And yeah, I would actually agree that I think we all suffer from that. In Vedanta, they call it the snake and the stick. So it's natural for us to have this negativity bias. Tell me if I'm making sense here. If you're walking on a trail and you see a stick in the trail, it's healthy for you to go, oh my gosh, is that a snake? But if we're ignoring the stick because we're assuming it's just a stick, it's not a snake, well, that might end badly for you. So it is better for you to react, or even if it's overreacting, but follow us to the modern age is literally people overreact all the time. Like, does that make sense? Kind of finding a middle way, or did I lose the plot?
Yeah, no, I think yes. Yeah. I mean, that is like the Ian McGilchrist thing. Like you have to be able to detect between seeds and sand, but then you also have to be able to spot the predator on the periphery, and
you got to see the meta beyond. Yes,
that's what. I mean,
potential danger.
And that's the thing. I always try to think about, like, whenever I'm getting too much like in the weeds and like trying to like understand, maybe precisely what some passage is saying, and then I always have to go back and look at the big picture and try to figure that out.
That's natural.
Yeah.
I think we're meant to vacillate between left and right, and by doing that, it gives us the consolidated, homogenized, or what would you call it, like a supra position, one that is not outside, but one that's informed by all. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I always say they would not translate as many words as, I mean, why on earth do we translate logos?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just because I've never been happy with an English translation of the word logos.
Yep.
Why not just leave it?
For me, it's Hesed, right? That love that God embodies, that we try to embody. So sometimes it's translated as love, right? Corinthians is at 13:13. Faith, hope, and love, above all else is love. Sometimes it's faith, hope, and charity, but it misses the point. It is a love. And Augustine was obsessed with this. And one of my favorite philosophers, Hannah Arendt, wrote about it for 30 years, that this love is so distant from our comprehension as the human. And this is talking about the difference between your true self and your fake self. This love in Greek, they had to use multiple words to translate this idea of love. Agape is what Augustine was obsessed with, and so was Hannah Arendt. But I like to point to metta in Sanskrit. Pali, Maitri in Sanskrit, and it's loving kindness. And you know what's beautiful is they invented the word loving kindness to translate chesed, and we reused it to translate metta because it means the exact same thing. I think that's a beautiful, what would you call it? Resonance of cultures, truths.
True.
Yeah. Don't tell me I digressed again. I am struggling. I am so sorry. I'm going to try to figure out how to make myself understood, because there's nothing worse, right?
I can't see the chat. What are people saying? Did you digress? I
No,
followed
that's
you.
what I'm assuming. I'm just afraid that what I'm laying down just ain't making sense. But yeah, I'm struggling to make sense. So yeah.
I don't think that's the case, Al.
Hmm?
I don't think you need to worry about that.
Yeah, well, I do. See, I believe there is this theory that, we do speak for future generations, like you shouldn't be what do they call that? Audience capture. But there's also this thought in psychology, like when you have someone that's talking about a subject and they use words that are above what's necessary, it denatures the very point and their authority. So that's what I fear. I mean, I don't use any of these words to sound smarter. No, it's what Mark mentioned. Like I find these words wanting when they try. And what I was going to talk about earlier, I get the common question about desire. It's tanha in Sanskrit, but it's not desire. It's more thirst. It's like it's a natural thing to be thirsty, but when it degrades. So what I liken it to is 1 Timothy's 8-11, right? Something that takes you from your path. Something that what is it that the passage that contravenes sound doctrine. And that's the answer I used to give for intoxicants in Buddhism, right? Because I'd always get that question, right? Oh, I take drugs. What about, like prescription drugs? Like people would be that black and white. And I would explain to them, like, no, you don't have to worry about drinking alcohol or any of that stuff, because anything can have you stray from the path. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be an intoxicant. And that was the message in Buddhism. And I think we could see that elsewhere, but I'm sorry. I don't want to trigger anybody. What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I
Why
think
would that trigger? Go ahead, Ethan. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
no. I mean, okay. So, Al, are you saying like, in terms of Mark's question, why would that trigger? Are you concerned? Because like, it's when I hear you, the way I understand you. If right, this is just me being like, this is my best attempt at understanding your general position. Is something like when I was in college, like the coexist movement was big. Okay, I don't like that. So that's where I'm at currently. Is I hear you and it falls into that. But then there's also this other thing of all of these languages, and you have understanding of multiple languages, which means you're thinking about ideas, for lack of a better word,
Cross cultural and cross what they call linguistic relativity. Yes, sir.
And to me, I go, that's the thing where it's like, that is a different human experience of an idea than only having one language.
That's why Schopenhauer said that we are to learn another language, not to go around fancy. And no, you learn another language, and that allows you to separate the words from the ideas. You get what I mean? So many people get tied up. Like that's what I meant by my example of the vicissitudes. Like it's funny, I learned it from Al, but when I use that word, people are pedantic about it, right? They think, oh, it means this or means that, but it's one of those words that has a superposition. Like the example I give was the incredible wasted time of Jordan Peterson and Vivek Ramaswamy. And just so you understand, Vivek is wisdom, it's comprehension. So the irony is hilarious. But they spent hours talking about God, but to Vivek, God is Ishwara, a completely different concept. Right. And to Peterson, we don't know yet, but it sounds like it might be Jesus. You get what I mean? And that's, I think, where we're falling. It's not about, and this is what y'all keep saying, I'm not an expert in these languages. Like I started, like I said, young, needing to learn to translate because my world was filled with people speaking other languages. But what I did is
Will you tell us about that? Like, will you tell us just like the story of your beginning of learning languages?
Oh, well, I grew up in a home that was multicultural in so many ways. And I grew up in a Northern Ontario community that spoke English and French bilingually. We also had a strong influence of Irish and Gaelic, Gaeilge, as they say, right? And that's just the worst. It's so hard to learn. And so, honestly, I think I was reacting to that. So I wanted to learn. As I said, I was raised that translation and seeing the world in multiple languages was normal for me, right? Like the joke I used to tell is I'm dyslexic, but my whole world was dyslexic to begin with, because I'd be on the city bus and there could be 3 or 4 different languages going on, because I grew up in a town where I went to high school, but the whole town was filled with it. I went to high school with hockey players from around the world, right? Because we took in the Ontario Hockey League players, Indians from all over Canada, and trust me, I grew up around them. And if you don't mean it maliciously, you can say Indian, right? But so all these languages around me, so that I lived this superposition that Schopenhauer was talking about, is that I separated word from ideas. And so this artifact of being dyslexic never actually slowed me down. It's actually this argument that if you're dyslexic, you have trouble learning another language. They told me, oh, well, it was bad for you to have been put in early French immersion. That was the next stage of my evolution of being in language. Trudeau, the early Trudeau, had a dream that if we took Anglophone kids and put them into French immersion, meaning almost everything in French, that they could learn. And what I discovered is what Ireland discovered, is what we're seeing with a lot of native languages and around the world, that if you just teach the language without the culture, you fail. And what I mean by that is I grew up in a French community. I grew up speaking French. I was raised by French people. Like my neighbors were all French. So I actually had a French accent until mid-high school, of all things. What I realized is you can't just teach the language, because without the culture, you have nothing, right? The language is only one part of the component, right? And so I guess the story is that linguistic relativity was at the heart of my journey to becoming, because as a dyslexic who had fallen through the cracks, I had to teach myself language. I had to teach myself people's body language, right? 80%. What do you call it? Nonverbal, right? And a hack for some people is get a job in telemarketing, because people tell you their body language through their voice. That was my hack till I started to learn people. But again, my love for language was from a young age, and I didn't understand what it was. And so I got into what I call modern philology. So I fell in love with authors that were translated. And I'll give you an example. What I was going to give an answer to Mark earlier, right? So when I talk about what I said, what would be controversial? Well, I was talking about 1 Timothy 8-11, right? Anything that goes against sound doctrine. But the example I was going to give is, it's not that any of us can be free of our baser desires, our thirsts. It's what Balzac taught. And there's another example. People don't understand, like Nietzsche, you do have to know multiple languages to even read him. But Balzac's a simple one. I see a lot of people who say, oh yeah, I read Balzac. But Balzac wrote in a way that you can't read it in translation. You have to read it in its original French, because he said, like Nietzsche, so many things, right? But you have to only know it from the language. And that's what you're missing, I think, when you don't understand the transition. It's not that a lot of things are lost. It's what I even saw with Jung. Jung failed as a philologist because he thought that the Chinese language was missing metaphor and story and myth. And that's where he failed, because that's what the language is completely made up of. So the example I give is something that's lost. It's in one of the openers of a Balzac book that's lost in English. Is he explains that the French government had realized that we couldn't suppress those baser desires of the human creature. And what I liken it to today is, do you know that bodybuilders realize that if you don't have a cheat day, or as an example, Jordan Peterson, I think he's experiencing this exact same human effect. Because he's been on an elimination diet for so long, he's going a little loopy, right? Bodybuilders realize that you got to give yourself a cheat day once a week. Balzac explained that the French government realized that you got to let people have their little, what do you call it? Releases. You know what I mean? But yeah, did that make sense at all? Oh, yes, you just wanted to know my background. So it was by necessity. The stuff I fell in love with. I fell in love with Nietzsche, which meant I had to read the Bible and know it. And I had to know German and French and Latin and Greek, because he was a philologist. But my point here is, I didn't learn to be a classically trained philologist. I applied what I call modern philology, which means take those same practices, the same theory of learn one language really well, and then you have a second one, right? So if that were me, I would have been like maybe classical Chinese, Sino-Japanese from ancient, what they're called oracle bone scripts. That would have been my number one. And then second, maybe, Sanskrit. But that technically is the same as Pali because it's literally the same characters, right? So, but for me, I realized, holy crap, for years, I had been applying the same principles of philology to understand what Nietzsche meant. Like regularly, I hear Nietzsche and scholars say, oh, Nietzsche meant resentment when he said ressentiment. But that tells me two things. One, they never read Nietzsche because he explains what he meant by it. And two, they don't have the concept of modern philology or the skills in the language. So what I mean by that is if they were to go, and machine learning is beautiful, they could look up ressentiment and you could break it down. And it means to re-sentiment, re-experience. So yes, there's resentment in that because what happens is you're so traumatized by an event that this ressentiment is that you're reacting to something that happened in the past as if it were happening now. So you're not present, you're not aware. So there's your Jungian psychology when he talks about place. So for me, I had to learn this exegesis, I guess you guys would say, philology, because I fell in love with Nietzsche early on. And I'm one of those weirdos that if I come across a word I want to look up, I would go and look it up. And like I said, I told you this before, actually. I think I discovered that just by accident, I had taught myself, philology. So there you go. That's my origin story. Not much of a superhero, right?
I always think it's so interesting finding the connection between culture and language.
Mm-hmm.
And, there was like,
Exactly.
there's like that Sapir-Whorf hypothesis that.
Yeah, Sapir-Whorf. Yes, sir.
Yeah. And like,
that's what I was alluding to.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And then they really wanted to go away from that, but it's come back as evident, it's definitely evident to true to a certain degree. Like, and I think maybe in some way, the thing that, so like, because they found, like, especially with some of those tribes, like in the Amazon, like they don't have a system of numbers. They'll have like many and few or something like that.
Yep.
And once they're like grown up, once that, like, they cannot learn numbers. It's impossible for them to figure it out because it's so baked in and it's one language, because they didn't learn, it's not like you couldn't it's not like you couldn't invent letter numbers or the concepts, but really it's because there's no need in the culture for mathematics. And so they didn't invent it. And then it's that's like a bigger concept that has come in. But the interesting thing is that it's not like the end of the story or whatever, like that difficulty in translation, there is still like points of connection with other cultures and stuff, in our humanness. But I thought, it's interesting because, the fact that Christianity has basically always said that the Word of God can be translated
That's a bit of a problem, yeah.
Well, no, it's absolutely true, and really where it comes rooted in is, so okay. Well, here's the contrasting thing. Like the contrasting one would be Islam, because you cannot translate the Quran. If you translate the Quran into any language other than Arabic, it's not the Quran. It's a interpretation of the Quran, which so there is always there is a certain aspect of that thing where you say, like, interpretation is involved in any translation, but what they're saying is that the real ultimate sense requires the original language, and that means it also requires, in some sense, the culture.
Yep.
Or it's why their culture,
to understand it. Yeah.
And it's why their culture doesn't change. It's also why it's still stuck practically in the Stone Age, in some parts of the world.
The young lady that was here earlier, like, that's a great example. She has obviously an excellent command of French, but not a native understanding that le ciel, the sky, is not always about heaven. Like if I were to say paradis, which is our word for paradise, okay, But still, even that isn't referring to heaven. That might be referring to some sort of utopian, and les cieux might be closer, right? So the skies. But that's exactly what I think we're missing here is can I give you a quick little example of this in real life? Or did
Go
I
for
cut
it.
you off, Michael? Yeah. So when I was giving tours in the Buddhist temple, that's a longer story, but what I ran into that was heartbreaking is there was different kinds of characters. Like, long story short, there's the ancient characters that I study, which no one really uses anymore, the Oracle Bone scripts, or there's a few other names for them, and they're really, really ancient. No one really follows that stuff, but it is the proto language that people call Chinese and even Japanese. But in China, there's two kinds. There's traditional, what they call traditional characters, and then there's what they call the simplified. And so I was given, when was that? In the mid 2000s, the tours, late 2019, around 2019. So this is well into the modern era. And we had dedications on the wall, particularly one in particular, but there's different quotes and stuff around in Chinese. But the dedication was from a Chinese monk who had came over to Canada in 67 or something like that. It was our centenary, what's the English word for 100-year anniversary?
Centennial.
Yeah. And founded this Buddhist temple. None of the Chinese people I ever had come through that could read his inscription. Right? They knew the characters, some of them, because they'd been trained in simplified Chinese, but they didn't know what he was getting at. They could only say, well, something about the falls and it's propitious. That's me reading into it because I went and looked into it, right? Because it's the way the language works. It's not about that character, that character, that character. It's about their interaction, but more so. The example I might use is, sorry, it's a bit of a digression, but this is why I think Jung used the term place. Meaning it's what Vervaeke's obsessed with. Like, you got to be present and aware. That's Vedantin. But I think the reason why it's so profound is in Chinese, and it's flowed all the way down to Japanese, is place. In Japan is basho. And if you speak to a Japanese person and you show them this character, they'll just, oh yeah, place. But if you break it down, if you go back to its earlier resonance, it's two separate characters. It's the warrior prepared for battle, prepared for action, and the place of action. So, right, this idea of place, of basho, has come down to us now that it's the where sumos meet. It's the contest, and I've said this before, right? Sumo is unique because it's meant to be both of them doing their absolute best. But I think this is why Nishitani, a famous Zen Buddhist Heidegger taught philosopher, but I think it heavily influenced by Nietzsche. I know I'm obsessed with Nietzsche, but he's profoundly influenced so many circles of thought. Yeah, exactly, the Kyoto School. So many circles of thought have been profoundly influenced by this man's, some of them crazy ideas and others not so much, but that's the whole takeaway here. And it fits back to what is the authentic self? The authentic self is when you're not reacting based on what you perceive to be happening or what happened in the past, that Nietzschean ressentiment. It's being present, aware, ready for action, in the place of action, right? Ready. I think in Greek, it's makarios, right? You're trying to embody the very best version of yourself. Does that make sense? Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, so, the interesting thing I found out when I was, because I was trying to figure out some of the stuff, like well, here's the really interesting thing. I found like a lot of people would discount, like maybe the ideas of the more fundamentalist Christians in regards to things like creation, because it's, I'm saying as like intellectual people, it's like you can't be an intellectual and believe in a young earth or something like that, or a literal whatever. And you can't believe in the literal interpretation.
Yeah.
But like I had known essentially what I saw is like I knew too many people that were genuine people that believed it was true, and and essentially, I mean, even I would say it's like, okay, if you believe the parts of the Bible about Jesus, and that maybe affects you, like, you know, you have a spiritual encounter with Jesus, and so you know it's true in that sense, then like, what do you do with the fact that it's connected to these other parts of the book? um and beyond that, I would say, like, the well, the worst positions were the ones that were the explanations that tried to get around the problem, like by saying it's a metaphor about, like, the temple, or like, I mean, there's like symbolic elements of that you could say that's in there, but then you even have to ask, what is reflecting what? Like, I think if you look at like this tabernacle God has them build, he's trying to get them to remember the act of creation, not the other way around. But or like the stuff where it's like, oh, the days are like thousands of years and stuff like that. It's like, well, no, because if you read it as a book, if you picked it up and didn't know this is a thing that people, you know, you're just picking it up you pretend it's fiction and you pick it up, you're going to read those things as literal, because that's what makes sense within the book. Like, the book doesn't make sense when you would never get, the only reason you get to those weird explanations is because you're trying to wrestle with that cognitive dissonance element. But anyway, and I started thinking about it. Okay, well, that's right. Like, so starting the beginning, that's not really the best place, because if you take it literally, and then you get to that story of the Tower of Babel, and then you realize that when they say like Moses wrote it, it's not to say like it just came out of Moses's head, like Joseph Smith did with the Book of Mormon. You know, these are obviously, there's like the genealogies in there are showing like the segments of probably of different authorship, or different people who were penning the sections, and it was transmitted, whether in written form or just orally. So at anything that comes before and the after of that event, that's already a translation. So essentially, I think we don't have, or you know, maybe we could say like the first 11 chapters of Genesis, it's literal, but we can only base the meaning of those words based on our experience with things that are in the here and now that might be very different from the things that they were describing over there. So in some sense,
remember,
it's like,
for hundreds of years, it was handed down orally. So yeah.
And so it's like, and so then I was like, oh, okay, well maybe that's the event that's more worth looking into, and it's way harder. Like, we can see the differences, like the evolution of languages to some degree, but really we always see it as interactions between people. People
can't separate them. Yeah.
Or it's in extreme isolation, and you know, like, or you know, because there's like you have to develop your word. You have to develop new words to describe new phenomenon. So a language, you know, as a culture complexifies, they will invent new words for new phenomenon.
Or definitions shift, and people forget that they can shift back too.
Yeah. So but there's not really, but there's so many distinct languages that are completely unrelated. You know, they're total isolates or whatever, like that. We can't account for them all. And the really interesting thing is, you know, it says God said he was never going to flood the earth again, whole earth.
That's Genesis 8:21.
Yeah. It doesn't say I'm never going to do this thing with the Tower of Babel again. And my thought is that there's probably at least a couple places where it might have happened again. Like, because one weird one is like Papua New Guinea, because that like island, it's one island and it's got like 80 distinct unrelated languages. Like, that's crazy. And then like the Amazon is like another like similar thing. So anyway, but so my thought was, okay, we can trusting like that God is good. With the flood, we can more or less believe him that everybody and everything that made it into the ark was worth preserving, and the rest of it really wasn't. What does that mean? We don't really know. But with the Tower of Babel, he was trying to discourage a certain
Hubris.
behavior.
Hubris, right?
Yeah.
Amongst us.
Yeah. Well, there you go. It's another one. Maybe they have their own Tower of Babel type event. But he's not like, it's the thing of people always framing this as like God was punishing mankind when he did that. But God's a father, and I believe he's a good father, and I believe that he does the things that he does for the good of his children. And so when I look at that event, I think about like, what is that going to do? Now, the problem is that they were totally united towards a bad aim. But then once you have this confusion of languages, and we do know that lots of languages really, it is cultures interacting with each other that really, that's the spark that lights the fire of development in some ways. But if you think about it, it's like if you don't have the same language, you're gonna be very slow when you approach your neighbor, the foreigner. You're gonna lift your hands. You're gonna show that you come in peace, and you're gonna try to you're gonna try to like point at things and draw pictures, and you're gonna try to find that meaning, and
Shared meaning.
Yeah, and so what it fosters trust and goodwill. That the barrier of not speaking the language actually causes people to pause or whatever. It's not like it's not like when you have a tribal feud and those are our enemies, then you just attack them, when you see them. But and even I think in the sense that like these cultures and people are they're struggling, and that when you're struggling, that's when you're going to be more open to reaching people out.
Open-minded.
But the interesting thing, so this was the other little nugget that I found with Islam. There's a lot of reiteration of a lot of the biblical stories in the Quran. And talks about Noah and the flood, I think, and lots of stuff about Abraham and all that. But no Tower of Babel. It's not in there. They don't have, unless if it was in one of those older versions when they burned it, because
1905.
Because it totally undermines their position of like Arabic as this supreme, perfect language.
And the Quran. Many of them today believe there is only one, and they don't know of the at least 32, right?
Yeah.
That existed in the last 100 and some years. Yeah.
So it's interesting because just that reframing of things and seeing like, oh, this was God. He really was trying to shepherd his people. He was shepherding them by scattering the flock in that sense.
I agree with that. I mean, think about this. Like, here's my weird interpretation. When we all share one language, we become lazy, I think, right? And I think that the Tower of Babel is one of my favorites, right? What is that, Genesis 10 or is it Genesis 11? I think it's this idea that you just said it. And the example I give is, I think it's called The 13th Warrior. It's with Antonio Banderas.
Yeah.
There's a scene where he's learning. He's an Arab, I think, that came to Scandinavia or something. There's a scene, you can look it up on YouTube, where he's learning their language. He's listening and he's following their context. And I think this is exactly what you're getting at, that if we're all of the same language, we tend to drift apart because we get lazy. And I argue that we ignore this, that I believe you hit on it, but in reverse. I don't think languages grow because of interaction. I think it's because of outside pressure that languages stay together. Do you follow what I mean? Because the language I use as an example is the Celtic language. It is arguably one of the oldest extant on Earth. The Om alphabet, some people pronounce it Ogam. It's this weird language that's carved onto stones, and it has these weird connections that go all the way back to Proto-Sanskrit. But I think the reason why the language survived as long as it did is because these Celtic people were not insular, but so authentic and certain of their faith and their culture. Because the example I give is when the Druids were under pressure, they just reinterpreted themselves as Christian scholars. And there's an argument to be made because of that. There's a whole swath of Christianity that has survived and flourished because of their influence. And so I think that's where we're missing. And I wonder if a big part of it is maybe not just the grass is greener. Maybe it's the liturgy in some of these other languages. What do you guys think of that? Like, right, when it's a language that you're not 100% familiar with, it kind of gets the reverse of the cognitive dissonance. It gets your interest. What do you guys think? You know?
Yeah. Well, I definitely think, that's the thing that maybe a lot of people miss, because we have so many people that are, well, it's your thing about going back home again or whatever. But, maybe they get on some, I don't know, not everybody makes it all the way home, but it's like, you leave the faith of your father, you go out into the wilderness, you find out there's nothing there, and then everybody comes back, but they come back to a different form of Christianity. And a lot of times it's the difference of it. It blinds you to the triggers or whatever, the aesthetic things that you have that negative association with. But it does also force you to learn it more in depth, because you have to learn, wait, you're like, we never did any of this stuff in my old church. Why is he doing this? Why is he doing that? What does this mean? And that learning process, you're understanding it and appreciating it on a deeper level. Exactly. And then it's hitting all the right buttons, and then but then everybody just goes, "Oh, this was the real one, and that was that other one was the fake one." It's like, well, they're actually real. They're probably really both the real ones. You just took the time. Circumstance forced you to learn about one, and the other one you just kind of were born into and didn't know what was going on.
You're so right. In fact, I've lived this myself. So in the temple that I told you about, it was a museum and a temple complex. So they used to, in the Chen tradition, they would walk around reciting the Dharani mantra, the compassion mantra. But the vast, vast majority of them didn't know what they were pronouncing. They didn't know what they were saying. They were just making the sounds in unison and walking around together. It's what the Indians would call kankrama, right? So physical act meditation. But it even goes so far as in Japan, they purposely mispronounce the characters. So when they're repeating the sutras, they're just making sounds. It's kind of interesting. And then it can still work because it's about being in unison with the sounds. But where it fails is, I remember the temple was going to have what they call a Shurangama retreat or whatever. So they chant the Shurangama Sutra. And this is what's funny about it. I actually asked a few of them, I'm like, oh yeah, do you know what the Shurangama is? And they were like, no, it's a parasol, right? So what you're doing is you're praying for the world to have a parasol of peace and protection. And you know what I mean? So like hundreds of people coming to chant this sutra for world peace, but none of them seem to have understood what they're chanting or the tradition. And I wonder if that's what people are desperate to find, is not just, hey, we do this because we think it's a value, but something that has a tradition with what would you call it? A provenance of sufficiency, right?
I have a funny story. It's a very similar thing. So I heard this when I was in Bible college. One of the professors had been a missionary in China for a long time. And he was telling the story about some other guy, I guess, or I don't even know how old the story was, but a missionary had come to some village, and this guy just like caught the gospel like full on. It was like, an immediate change. And then he was reaching everybody in his village and everybody in the surrounding village and telling everybody about the gospel and how and what Jesus could do and all this stuff. I don't know if he had like a Chinese Bible or anything to read, but he was sharing it in the message. But then like every day he would go and he would pray for hours. And he would pray in the same language that the missionary spoke, because that was a holy man, so he had a holy language.
What he was taught as well, right? Yeah.
But he only knew 2 words, so every day he would pray for hours and hours. January, February,
beautiful.
January, February,
He
January.
infused it
February.
with the power.
And he had no idea what it meant, but he knew that those were English words and that it was special.
You know,
But,
it's funny.
that's
I think
even-
it's a culture
yeah.
thing. I'll just give you a quick before I forget. The Chinese, it's my favorite word from Buddhism. It's Anattara Samyak Sambodhi, and it just means the person being the perfect being, right? It's Anattara Samyak Sambodhi. So it's like the best person following the best path and getting the best result. And the Chinese have essentially translated it almost phonetically, so I wonder if it's a tradition, a cultural thing with the Chinese, because unlike some other cultures that changed from the Sanskrit, a lot of the really essential Sanskrit words like Guanyin Pusa in Chinese, so it's I can't remember all of the Chinese words, but if I said them to you, if I had a moment to remember them, they sound almost identical to the original Sanskrit words. So they had a hundreds of years of translation tradition to actually integrate, because they had Tibetan tutors for years and yada, yada, yada. So I wonder if, that's something we may be missing, that there's books that I could recommend recently published about, we haven't lost our enchantment. We just need to realize that enchantment is stepping into something. It's not being told or shown something. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But sorry,
Yeah.
Nate. Howdy, welcome, bud.
That was the
How are you,
one
Nate?
just
Doing all right.
about the Holy Spirit praying for us in groans, they're beyond words. It's deeper than words. It's like pure. I don't know how to say emotion, but it's like or intention or something.
Well, I think what Mark meant, it's beyond logos or word, right? The translation of logos into word is leaving something, because God is saying something more than we can do with our words. Is that what you mean? Beyond concepts, beyond words, even beyond thought?
I think that's how Jordan Peterson gets himself in trouble with the whole God question. No, for real. And actually, I was actually going to do a podcast today with the guy that I know from Paul Axton's spaces over at Forging Plowshares, and he came to me with a video from some young atheist YouTuber who had a little bit more of a substantive criticism than you typically see from atheist types who are critiquing Jordan Peterson. And was cognizant enough to realize that his fear of nihilism was a driving factor in what he was doing in that Jubilee debate. But what I said, I told him I wasn't really interested in talking about making commentary on that particular video, but talking about like why the fear of nihilism is a genuine fear, and why Jordan Peterson is right to not want to reduce belief in God to beliefism. So that the question is about, do you believe in God as if it were a fact in the world? What we're trying to do is we're trying to transform our lives to conform to a pattern of being. And that isn't something that we accomplish through any system of mere belief. Belief isn't deep enough. And Jordan knows that. And that's why he basically is refusing that game, because he has enough insight to realize that's not the game we're being called to play.
They can call him no matter how he conceptualizes it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so
I did that too. I thought his whole question about worship was beautiful in the transcript. But as you say, when that kid was there and we get caught into the whole dramaturgy of the world.
Yes. Yeah. And he got caught up in the whole like spirit of the moment, and he failed to live up to like his own principles, which means that he doesn't really, according to his own statements, he doesn't really believe what he purports to believe. And he's right to say that the things that come out of your mouth that you say you believe aren't the important things, that your actions speak louder about your identity than your words do.
You know me through my works. You'll know my faith through my works. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I realized I wanted more time to prepare, because Peterson's concept of God is actually really good and really deep and really profound, and the people that are mocking him are way off base. And I wanted
love
more
to
time. I wanted more
collaborate.
time to actually like prepare more so that I can make that clear and kind of like stand up for the guy a little bit when he's getting pilloried.
And I'd love to collaborate because I am in the no, but seriously, I'm in the middle. Is because I believe he's failing in some areas that no one's criticizing him on. This is what blows me away. I think he fails in areas that no one gives him heck for, but I think he's winning in areas that he gets heck for. It's mind-boggling.
I'd love to hear that. Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
You know, it's funny. Yeah, I've been thinking about that. So in revising and trying to make a much smaller version of my book, took the one selection kind of about the core kind of idea, but then added one part, and it really is about, it's about that thing with like that John Vervaeke's been talking about with like credibility and just the embodied example that we portray, and how important it is that it lines up with our stated beliefs, because there is a right, there are better and worse stated beliefs, but the better and worse embodied example trumps them as far as like what people see of us. So like you know, and even thinking like you know, I don't like that clip that Paul plays of, well, I don't know if you get, okay, I'm not worried about that. The kids are screaming, but my wife's out there now. So when that clip that Paul likes to play of John Vervaeke talking about how agape, you know, I don't like how he says that it puts like it turns a non-person into a person.
Okay.
That's right, because I don't think all humans are persons. I think that's any philosophy that category.
Well, not only that. Yeah, you're definitely, no, that's really good pushback on what Vervaeke said, which is otherwise excellent, because the entire thing is that everyone, although I kind of know what he's saying at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I know what he's saying.
I think it's kind of like it's like almost like a potency and act distinction, where it's like everything within the creation has this potency toward personhood, and when we're doing our job correctly, when we're as true human beings, then we are elevating not only ourselves but everything else in creation up into the actualization of that potency.
Yeah, well, so I mean, you know, that is, you know, to say, because obviously the problem with that is that's the justification some of those ethics professors give, you know, for, oh, well, you know, an abortion's not really wrong because it's a non-person. They don't have personhood yet. But
so nothing has a potential for something that is not already some sense that its identity.
Yeah. But you know, there is, well, but the interesting thing though is that humans, and it's not even just the physical like weakness, you know, because this is what Peterson talks about, like in these orphanages, they found out babies won't even eat if you try to just give them a bottle. They won't eat it if you don't like pick them up and touch them and like give them that love.
The Romanian.
But you know, there's a certain threshold where people get enough of that so that they can survive. But then, but if you're alive to be more or less conscious, you've already received that. But then there's this huge disconnect between how people treat other people after the fact, and I think which is really a betrayal of the fact that we have all received with no prior justification, we have received an amount of love and nurture that brought us to the point where we could then start treating each other like dicks all the time. And, you know, you know, so you know, that's just, you know, kind of the interesting thing. I'm going to go hang out with my family, but look forward to seeing how the rest of this thing goes on.
Yeah.
See ya.
So what inspired this crazy effort of yours, Ethan?
Primarily because my fiance is gone this weekend and I'm in Alaska and I don't know anyone. And I just didn't feel like going camping this weekend.
Or what he was talking about. Like, it wasn't just the orphans in Romania. We did a study on these rhesus monkeys, and believe it or not, it proves this idea. It's authentic engagement again. Okay, so when they took these rhesus monkeys, if they had nothing, they wouldn't challenge anything. They were so damaged by being raised by no parent that they wouldn't challenge anything new. Anything new scared them, right? But even the monkeys that had anywhere